Hello there, little masters, and welcome once again to the Prancing Pony Podcast, where tonight, even the good stuff isn't quite good enough to drown our sorrows.
No, it's really just one big cup of woe tonight, and we're draining it to the dregs. But hey, West to Hell, my friends. I'm Sean Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and I'm here with the Man of the West, the Aragorn to my Aemir, Alan Sisto.
Thank you, Sean. Tonight, we are wrapping up our read of Chapter 21 of the Silmarillion of Túrin Turambar. Now, this is the last of 3 episodes on the chapter, so if you haven't listened to the first 2 parts of our discussion, please check those episodes out before you continue on. This last dose of misery just isn't complete without the first 2. It'd be kind of like experiencing 80s music by going straight to The Cure, instead of starting with something only mildly depressing like Depeche Mode.
Okay. Yeah, no, you don't want to go straight to that top level there. You got to ease yourself in. Yeah, this is the story that ends not with a catastrophe, but just a plain old catastrophe.
And
we're going to get to that. Not an apostrophe. Oh, man.
Sorry.
But we'll get to that soon enough. First, though, I think we need to issue a brief
Don't say it. Addendum.
Addendum. Let's call it an addendum to a previous conversation.
Yeah, we spent a brief time in our first episode of this chapter talking about the death of Rian, Morwen's sister-in-law, the wife of Huor, the mother of Tuor. And even though she really doesn't play a part in this chapter, we kind of talked about it a little bit. We're going to get to her more in a couple episodes. We're going to get to her again in a couple of episodes.
Yeah, and I know we're both looking forward to that. I know it's
Very
one of our favorite stories.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in sort of our haste to get to the meat of the Túrin chapter, I think we might have given sort of an incomplete picture of Rian's death.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about how she laid herself down upon the Houghton Dengen, the Hill of the Slain, and died. And it appears to have been a voluntary death, and we compared it to Miriel's choice to leave her body and move on to Mandas, excuse me, and still struggling with that one.
Apparently so.
And we even compared it to Aragorn's voluntary surrender of his life at the end there.
Yeah, and that's true as far as it goes.
Mm-hmm.
And we would have given you all a more accurate picture if we'd pulled in some text from Unfinished Tales of Tuor coming to Gondolin. There we learned that when news of the Battle of Unnumbered Tears reached Dor-lómin, Rian, and I'm quoting from the chapter there, became distraught and wandered forth into the wild alone, and pregnant with Tuor, I might add. The book goes on to say that she would have perished there in the wild, but the Sindar came to her aid. She lived with them for a while, and it was with them that she gave birth to Tuor. Now, yeah, so that's when she was going to go look for Huor. One of the elves told her that he had died by the side of by his brother's side, by Húrin's side, and that was when she went to the.
Which we know that. Which that obviously wasn't accurate because we know Húrin didn't even die.
Well, died by the side of his brother.
Died by his side, I guess. But
right, because all of his people were, his guard were slain.
Yeah, never mind. I was reading that wrong.
I know, I did too. I thought the same thing. I'm like, wait a minute, but Húrin wasn't dead. But that's when she went to the Houghton Dengen, and there she laid her down and died. So it still seems less of that, suicide like, say, Denethor, and more death by broken heart. But she was at least able to choose the place and time of her passing. So maybe a better analogy then would be the death of Arwen in Appendix A of The Lord of the Rings, where after Aragorn dies, she laid herself to rest upon Cairn Amroth, and there is her green grave until the world is changed. Any thoughts on that, Sean? Anything, maybe a better analogy for you?
Well, I think Arwen is probably a little closer. I think the only thing that's kind of distinguishing this from Arwen is, this word distraught. I just think it seems to me a little bit more strong than this sort of quiet sorrow we see with Arwen.
But that was when the wandering. I guess I'm trying to figure out, was she still distraught after giving birth to Tuor, or was the distraught nature what caused her to go into the wild? I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know either. I mean, the other thing that I think of is, Arwen died after 120 years of marriage to Aragorn.
Man, that's a long time to be married to anybody.
Yeah, she was probably ready to see him go.
I mean, I'm celebrating 25 years this fall, but 120, I don't know. Yeah. Come back and talk to me in 95 years.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's, she lived a long life with her husband. She got to see her son grow up and her kids grow up. Right. Rian didn't get that. And so I could see being a reason why she would be a bit more, probably more in shock,
distraught,
maybe than. Yeah. But, I mean, hey, I'm just kind of psychoanalyzing now. I mean, the text really doesn't tell us any of this.
No.
I guess kind of to your point, Rian sensed that I think Rian sensed that she had a role to play.
Yeah,
and
I think so.
she saw it through, and then having seen it through, died. And that, is certainly like Arwen, I guess.
Yeah. And really almost two parts, two jobs.
Yeah.
One was to bear Tuor, and the other was to find Huor. And once she had given birth to Tuor
and
then found Huor was dead, then her purpose is done.
That's true.
So,
that's true. So,
because she was still going to look for him.
Yeah. So I'm sure her emotional state was probably still very different from Arwen, but I definitely think there's some similarity in terms of, accomplishing your task and then moving on.
And the voluntary nature of it, too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So was there anything else we wanted to touch on before we get into what I'm sure is going to be a very lengthy discussion tonight?
Fair warning that. Yeah, Sean, there is something I want to mention before we go on to wrap up this chapter. The Prancing Pony podcast is proud to support Mythmoot 4, a combination literary conference and fan convention sponsored by Signum University. This year's Mythmoot runs from June 1st to 4th at the beautiful National Conference Center in Leesburg, Virginia, where the theme is Invoking Wonder. Special guests for Mythmoot include Tolkien scholars Verlyn Flieger and Michael Drought, and the famous Tolkien artist Ted Naismith. You can find out more by visiting signumuniversity.org and clicking on the link for Mythmoot. Registration ends soon, so sign up today. I'm sorry to say that Sean and I won't be there, at least not this year, but you can tell us and the rest of the Prancing Pony podcast community all about it on our social media channels. One last thing, Sean, do we have anything from old Barliman to start with tonight? I don't think we've heard from him for a little while.
No, we haven't. We actually do have two questions that I would like to address tonight, but I want to address them in context. So I'm not going to read the questions now. I'm just going to say Tarek in Chicago and Maya in Michigan, stay tuned because we have some questions from both of you up in this episode later on.
Very good. Well then, on with the discussion. Why don't you start us off with a brief recap of how we got here?
Okay, yes, sort of the recap of what I like to consider the Beleriandic Greek tragedy.
That's about right.
So we saw in our first episode on this, basically Túrin was fostered in Doriath, had a little argument over dinner, which ended badly for the other guy, and then and then so he ended up leaving Doriath, went on a series of misadventures. He took to a life of brigandry and outlawdom. I don't even know if outlawdom is a word. Thank you. You like that?
I like that word very much.
But then after, kind of being out there in the wild with the outlaws, Beleg, Cuthalion, caught up with him. They were good friends back in Doriath. And they kind of had a...
Yeah.
Right up until Túrin killed him by mistake.
Pretty much right up until
at the end of our first episode. Yep.
Yeah.
Túrin took Beleg's sword, Anglichel, which had actually been forged by Eol. Mm-hmm. And eventually...
More on that tonight.
And eventually he reforged it as Gurthang, the Iron of Death. In our second episode, we saw Túrin befriend Gwyndor and go to Nargothrond. Mm-hmm. There, Finduilas, the daughter of Orodreth, fell in love with him. And Gwyndor, really, credit to the guy, he was in love with Finduilas, but he actually... Gwyndor. Oh, yeah, so much. More than anybody in this chapter, maybe.
Yeah, really.
Except maybe Beleg. But Gwyndor, he was in love with Finduilas.
We'll see a lot of good from Mablung tonight, too.
That's true. Yeah, Mablung is up there on my list,
too. He rocks,
yeah. Yeah. But Gwyndor, he was in love with Finduilas, but still he supported, their thing, and told her, go get him. But there are some things you should know about him. And then, meanwhile, Túrin is just rising in estimation of everybody in Nargothrond. He becomes basically a chief advisor to Orodreth, and convinces the people of Nargothrond to build a bridge across the river Narog and start fighting openly instead of in secret.
Well, yeah, you got to have a nice passageway for the big army to go out.
Right, exactly. Yeah, Túrin he just had no taste for their way of warfare. He wanted great deeds out in the open where he could shine and let his let his ego stretch a little bit.
give his ego some elbow room.
A little breathing room. Yeah, elbow room.
Stretch those ego legs.
Yeah. This advice was received well by the folks of Nargothrond, but elves from the Falas actually came warning them not to do it. Ulmo himself had warned them against it, but they did it anyway. And so, Sure enough, Glaurung the dragon came with a host of orcs and crossed the bridge because, duh.
He's the dragon, yeah. And that's a bridge.
And he didn't have wings, so he needed a bridge to get across.
Exactly.
Lays waste to Nargothrond. Everybody dies. Orodreth is killed. Gwyndor is killed. The orcs take Finduilas prisoner, and Gwyndor tells Túrin to go save her, saying that that's the only thing that's going to save Túrin from his own ill fate.
So of course Túrin went to save her. Right?
You'd like to think so, wouldn't you?
You'd like to think so, yes.
He goes in the opposite direction because he's Túrin. He actually, he was fooled by Glaurung.
Yeah.
Into thinking that Morwen and Nienor, his mother and sister, were actually back in Dor-lómin and were in danger. So he went straight to Dor-lómin while Glaurung settled in for a nice nap with his new treasure. He gets to Dor-lómin, finds his mother and sister not there because they've already gone to Doriath to look for him. Gets mad at all the Easterlings that have taken over Dor-lómin, kills them all, and then comes back south to find out that he was, of course, too late to save Finduilas, and she's actually been very sadly pinned to a tree by the orcs that had captured her. And with her dying breath, she cried out, basically, paraphrasing here, but basically that she's still waiting for him.
That's true.
Which is awful. So we pick up today with Túrin having sort of just left that behind. He's just come to the Forest of Brethil and taken up with some of the Houghton there because he hasn't ruined their lives yet. So I guess here he is.
That's awesome.
I'm sorry, I'm being especially flippant as part of the story because what else can you do?
Brethil's next.
So that exactly right. Brethil's next. And so that's where we find him today.
Yeah.
Did I miss anything?
No, I don't think so. That's an awesome little summary. We'll just dive right in. I'm going to start. We last left off with wielded rather the bow and the spear. So I'm going to start with the first paragraph and a little bit more. Now new tidings came to Doriath concerning Nargothrond, for some that had escaped from the defeat and the sack and had survived the fell winter in the wild came at last to Thingol seeking refuge, and the march wardens brought them to the king. And some said that all the enemy had withdrawn northwards, and others that Glaurung abode still in the halls of Felagund. And some said that the Mormegil was slain, and others that he was cast under a spell by the dragon, and dwelt there yet, as one changed to stone. But all declared that it was known to many in Nargothrond ere the end, that Mormegil was none other than Túrin, son of Húrin of Dor-lómin. Then Morwen was distraught, and refusing the counsel of Melian, she rode forth alone into the wild to seek her son, or some true tidings of him. Well, there you go.
I have to laugh a little bit about the refusing the counsel of Melian. Because,
yeah.
This is the Silmarillion, so nobody listens to Melian.
Nobody listens to Melian.
Oh, man.
I mean, you've got Amaya.
She knows things, y'all.
She does.
Listen to her.
You should. It's never wise to refuse the counsel of Melian, as we've learned. Nope. Always a bad idea. Mm-hmm. So we see, I don't want to necessarily go too far into this, and we won't do this on every point, but in this particular point, it's really important to kind of go into the Children of Húrin version, because we get so much more there. Not just more in terms of the narrative, but more in terms of Morwen's thought process. And I think this is really important because the curse isn't just on Túrin. It's on Húrin's kin. It's on all whom Húrin loves. And since we're going to spend some time talking about that curse, I want to make sure we get to that. But before we do, let's see what kind of the rest of this part of the story. What do we get? We get Mablin goes after, what else?
Yeah. Let's see.
Nienor hides. So Nienor hides there.
Nienor hides, yeah.
Yeah, she pulls a Durnhelm. She pulls a Durnhelm.
She disguised herself. She goes along with him. Yeah, that's right. We get that the fearlessness of her house was hers.
Oh, yeah.
Which I think is a fascinating phrase. This, you see there's boldness there, but also because this is, a child of Húrin, I just can't help thinking, man, this is just another bad decision for this family.
Yeah. But you'll see in the Children of Húrin version that her purpose in going is actually to get her mother to come back.
Oh, that's initially. Right. Okay.
So I think it's it's a really interesting. Let's go. I'll go ahead and pull that up because
why don't you go to that one? Yeah.
Yeah. So Thingol, not exactly known for offering or listening to good advice, suggests after they learn that the Black Sword is Túrin, that she ponders this for a while. Morgoth, he says, may be trying to draw them into acting with rashness. Wow, this is Thingol. I mean, he's giving some pretty good wisdom here. Maybe he's been listening to Melian. I don't know. But he suggests that even Túrin would want her to stay in Doriath where she's safe. Mm-hmm. Morwen's response, I got to tell you, this is Feanor-like in its misunderstanding.
Okay, wait.
Yeah. So he says, Here would he think you better bestowed than in any other land that remains, in the keeping of Melian. For Húrin's sake and Túrin's, I would not have you wander abroad in the black peril of these days. You did not hold Túrin from peril, but me you will hold from him, cried Morwen. In the keeping of Melian. Yes, a prisoner of the girdle. Long did I hold back before I entered it, and now I rue it. Nay, if you speak so, Lady of Dor-lómin, know this, the girdle is open. Free you came hither, free you shall stay, or go. Then Melian, who had remained silent, spoke. Go not hence, Morwen. A true word you said, this doubt is of Morgoth. If you go at his will. So
boy, she could have just thrown out the word thrall.
Thrall, I know. Prisoner of the girdle.
Wow.
But Melian's got a little bit more to say here to Thingol. Is really Morwen's in a delicate state. Let's put it that way. So Thingol Morwen basically says, "I'm going anyway. If you really care that much, you'll send some people with me." And he says, "Look, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I command my people, and they're not going anywhere." So he goes to Melian and asks, should I keep her from going? Melian says, "Against the coming in of evil I may do much, but against the going out of those who will go, nothing. That is your part. If she is to be held here, you must hold her with strength. Yet maybe thus you will overthrow her mind." So she's clearly, very emotionally fragile at this point.
Yeah.
And
so basically, so Melian is basically saying, first of all, by the way, there's no such thing as a prisoner of the girdle. She's saying that's the Thingol, basically. I can't do anything to stop someone from leaving.
Yeah.
But then, if you want to hold her, you'll have to do it with force, and
which could break her.
Which could break her. Yeah. Wow,
yeah.
That's interesting,
isn't it? And so, just like you said, Fëanor didn't grasp the word thrall. Morwen obviously doesn't understand what it means to be a prisoner. And so, as a result, she ends up acting in haste, exactly. Rashly, as Morgoth had intended.
Just what Morgoth wants, and Melian even said that to her.
Yeah, and there's even a line where she says that she wants to go after Túrin because none here will do aught but tarry till it's too. Or let me try that again. Because none here will do aught but tarry till too late. Doesn't that sound like Fëanor complaining about the Valar not doing anything?
The Valar wanting to wait and kind of take counsel, right?
Right.
Before going after Morgoth.
And yet we know that haste is not the best.
Don't be hasty.
Don't be hasty. I love that word, haste. Don't be hasty.
You really start to see where Túrin gets it from, don't you?
Don't you? Yeah.
I mean, and I'm not. Look, I'm not nearly as harsh on Morwen as I am on Túrin, but no. Definitely in the Children of Húrin, she does come across as sort of the source of a lot of his bad decisions, I think, sort of her influence.
Yeah.
I think she was strong in a lot of ways, and I think she was, kind of steadfast and fearless in a lot of ways, but she was also stubborn in some ways that weren't so good, and you really see that here.
That is the weak side of steadfastness, and she definitely displays that here. And she continues to do so because, again, this is staying in the Children of Húrin version, which we won't do. I think I've only got one other passage from that in the entire episode, but we're dumping it all up you up
much
front.
Longer time than we're going to be here.
But she, so Mabling's crew follows. Nienor's revealed, which we got to here in the main version of the text. But in the Children of Húrin version, Nienor gets some great lines trying to give her mother some wisdom. She says, "If the wife of Húrin can go forth against all counsel at the call of kindred," said Nienor, "then so also can Húrin's daughter. Mourning you named me, but I will not mourn alone, for father, brother, and mother. But of these you only have I known, and above all do I love. And nothing that you fear not do I fear." In truth, little fear was seen in her face or her bearing. Tall and strong she seemed, for of great stature were those of Hador's house, and thus clad in elvish raiment, she matched well with the guards, being smaller only than the greatest among them. "What would you do?" said Morwen. "Go where you go," said Nienor. "This choice indeed I bring, to lead me back and bestow me safely in the keeping of Melian, for it is not wise to refuse her counsel, or to know that I shall go into peril if you go." For in truth, Nienor had come most in hope that for fear and love of her mother would turn back, and Morwen was indeed torn in mind. "It is one thing to refuse counsel," said she. "It is another to refuse the command of your mother. Go now back." "No," said Nienor. It is long since I was a child. I have a will and wisdom of my own, though until now it has not crossed yours. I go with you, rather to Doriath for reverence of those that rule it, but if not, then westward. So,
So that is really, that's really clear.
That's
You're
really
right.
telling, isn't it?
Yeah, she really was trying to persuade her to come back, and it was only if you refused to, well, then I'm not letting you go alone.
Right.
I'm not gonna. If you're gonna go do something stupid, I'm not gonna let you do something stupid alone.
Because I've already lost
yes.
my father and my brother, whom I've never known. I don't want to lose you. You're the only one I've ever known. So, yeah, it's tough.
But but I also like this sort of plea to listen to wise counsel.
I know. Twice. It's not wise to refuse her counsel, and then I want to go back and out of reverence of those that rule it. Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah.
It's and we certainly revere wisdom. We revere Yeah. So Nienor's clearly wiser than her mom. She points out this is foolish.
Yeah.
But in the end, she's a child of Húrin, and her stubbornness wins out too.
Yeah. Wow, that is fascinating.
I love that stuff. That really, I think, tells us a lot about Morwen.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that in. That's really, really good.
Yeah, I couldn't help it. I looked through the Children of Húrin for this entire chapter. I kind of skimmed the book. I mean, didn't have time to read the whole book.
Yeah.
On top of the chapter, but I wanted to see whether there were some pieces like we did when we bring in stuff from History of Middle-earth, and there were a bunch, but this was one that really I felt brought a lot to the table.
I'm glad you did it because, it shows for anybody who's listening who hasn't read it yet and who maybe is reading the Silmarillion or reading these stories of the First Age for the first time, you do see that, it's, 200 pages, I think? Close to 300 pages, Children of Húrin? It's close to 300 pages. And it really does. There is a lot there that's not in this version. And you do get a bit more of the... a bit more of the drama, a bit more of the character motivation and stuff like that kind of makes for a more complete story. Yeah. Than what we get out of the Silmarillion. So, that's a really good illustration of that.
Well, I'm happy to have found it.
Thank you.
So, long story short, too late, they, Mablung finds them, can't convince them, they go forward. What happens next, though, when they get close to Nargothrond?
Before I get to that, I want to point out one word in here that I think is really key, and it's this word. It's in the paragraph right before what I'm about to read. Sure. It's this paragraph that starts with, "They came upon Morwen by the banks of Sirion, and Mablung besought her to return to Menegroth." It's in the Silmarillion where we get she was Fae. Morwen was Fae. I've
seen that before.
And I'm curious. I don't know if you probably don't have your Children of Húrin in front of you. I'm curious if that's in there.
I can certainly pull that up, actually. In the meantime, let's talk about Fae, because that came up with Feanor. It also came up with... we did a little analysis, didn't we? We looked at... we
did, yeah. There's a few references to it. I mean, there's a few uses of it in Lord of the Rings, right? Frodo is Fae when he's kind of going into Mordor. It's always this... Well, it really means like sort of mad with this sense of impending death. You're about to... You feel like you're about to die, and you're just kind of like, nothing to lose, I guess. Just sort of this madness that comes from... Well,
let's... to make sure we get the point, Tolkien actually used it quite a bit. First, after Morwen refuses the counsel of Thingol and Melian, Thingol was heavy-hearted, for it seemed to him that the mood of Morwen was Fae, and he asked Melian whether she would not restrain her by her power. Then we get...
so it's actually in that debate.
It's right before that, in that passage that I was quoting. Then we get Mablung saying to his company, "Now they are all Fae, and I like it not. More do I dread this errand of the king than the hunting of the wolf."
Wow!
But what is to be done? So they are all Fae. So he's talking about Húrin's kin in that case. He says it's by lack of counsel, not of courage. Boy, does Mablung sum up the entire story in this one sentence? Pretty
much, yeah.
Truly, it is by lack of counsel, not of courage, that Húrin's kin bring woe to others.
Yeah. So true. When we talk about that fearlessness.
So Mablung notices it, and he repeats it again to them. He says, "Fae, are you both, and foolhardy?"
Okay.
So
it's definitely
there.
It's we've used it. I mean, we've seen it in regards to Feanor in the Silmarillion. I think I found it appears
Yes.
4 times in the Silmarillion, twice in regards to Feanor.
Yep.
This is number 3, and we'll get number 4 later in this episode. But it's never a good thing. I mean, it's always referring to someone who's just kind of lost it, But it's I just thought it was really fascinating that it's used here because it's a word that we have talked about.
Yeah, I agree. No, I'm glad you pointed that out because I actually didn't catch that when I was skimming. And Fae's a big thing. So I'm glad you pulled that out.
Yeah, sure thing.
So now we get to find out. Yeah.
As they approach Nargothrond, here's where we get to.
He's not
so I'm going to.
anymore.
No, he's not napping anymore. But Glaurung was aware of all that they did, and he came forth in heat of wrath and lay into the river. And a vast vapor and foul reek went up, in which Mablung and his company were blinded and lost. Then Glaurung passed east over Narog. Seeing the onset of the dragon, the guards upon Amon Aether sought to lead Morwen and Nienor away, and fly with them with all speed back eastwards. But the wind bore the blank mists upon them, and their horses were maddened by the dragon stench, and were ungovernable, and ran this way and that, so that some were dashed against trees and were slain, and others were borne far away. Thus the ladies were lost, and of Morwen indeed no sure tidings came ever to Doriath after. But Nienor, being thrown by her steed, yet unhurt, made her way back to Amon Aether, there to await Mablung, and came thus above the reek into the sunlight. And looking westward, she stared straight into the eyes of Glaurung, whose head lay upon the hilltop.
Oh, my. So he's aware. He's not taking his nap anymore.
Nope.
The stench, there's something about this, the kind of this feel of the battlefield here where they're the blank mists and maddened by the dragon stench. That must have been something awful.
Awful, yeah.
What would dragon stench smell like?
I can't imagine. I can't. Just got to be rotten.
Yeah, rotting flesh.
Rotting flesh and like the worst reptile terrarium. Like if you ever had that friend who had snakes in terrariums, but he didn't clean up after.
Idea. Oh man, that big iguana thing.
No, but it's got to be something worse than that.
That guy in my college dorm, I was like, "What are you doing, man?"
Everybody had that one guy they knew who was like really into reptiles. Yeah. No, it's something. I mean, it's something horrible. I mean, this is a this is a creature that should not be.
You're right. It is an unnatural thing.
Yeah, it's going to have an unnatural stench. And every time I see Tolkien refer to smells, I always think about some of the reading we've done about World War I.
Yeah.
In fact, by the time this episode releases, I might have an olfactory essay up on the Prancing Pony Ponderings.
Olfactory essay.
I've got something in mind that that
technology's come a long way with the internet. We can include video, audio.
We can't do smell-o-vision,
but there is no smell-o-vision, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, it's probably for the best.
Oh my! And then of course we don't even know where Morwen goes. We'll see her again at the end of the story, but I don't think we ever find out exactly what happened to her during this time.
I know that is incredible to me. We were talking about this question. Yeah. I mean, she's obviously she doesn't have the same encounter with Glaurung that Nienor does, so
thankfully
none of that happens to. Yeah, thankfully. All we see is what happens when we meet her again later, and I can't imagine where she was.
That actually makes me think of something. We'll get to this at that point when we address Morwen at the end of the story, but there's a key thing at the end of the story that differentiates Morwen from Túrin and Nienor in terms of the curse, the effectiveness of the curse. I think you know where I'm going with that.
I know what you're talking about, yep.
And I wonder if some of that has to do with the fact that she didn't encounter Glaurung, that he was such an effective tool of the curse that he really was the chief instrument of the curse with his lies, wasn't he? Yeah. So you just you got to wonder about that, but
yeah. Very interesting.
I'll go ahead and read the next couple paragraphs, then we'll discuss this whole meeting with Glaurung. Her will strove with him for a while, but he put forth his power, and having learned who she was, he constrained her to gaze into his eyes, and he laid a spell of utter darkness and forgetfulness upon her, so that she could remember nothing that had ever befallen her, nor her own name, nor the name of any other thing. And for many days She could neither hear, nor see, nor stir by her own will. Then Glaurung left her standing alone upon Amon Ethir, and went back to Nargothrond. Now Mablung, who greatly daring had explored the halls of Felagund when Glaurung left them, fled from them at the approach of the dragon, and returned to Amon Ethir. The sun sank, and night fell as he climbed the hill, and he found none there save Nienor, standing alone under the stars as an image of stone. No word she spoke or heard, but would follow if he took up her hand. Therefore in great grief he led her away, though it seemed to him vain, for they were both like to perish, succorless in the wild. Utter darkness and forgetfulness. What a horrible, horrible experience that must have been.
I know.
Can't hear, can't see, can't remember even how to speak. Not remembering anything at all.
She's lost everything, and I'm always struck by how childlike she is after this.
Yeah.
We'll get some of this. She has no words for things.
No.
And she won't move unless you take her by the hand, she'll follow, but she won't go anywhere of her own accord. That's very childlike. And just hearing you read that passage from the Children of Húrin of what she was like before, because we don't get that in the Silmarillion. We see how strong she was. We see how wise she was. And we see how she stood tall in the face of a very, scary proposition.
Very much so.
And then to see what she's reduced to after her encounter with Glaurung, it's heartbreaking.
And yet there's a little bit of maybe naivete in Children of Húrin that we see in her. I'm sorry, I said I wasn't going to bring Children of Húrin back up, but there's a little bit here. We see in this text that having learned who she was, he constrained her to gaze into his eyes. In Children of Húrin, we find out how he recognizes her, because he doesn't look at her and go, "Oh, I've seen your picture on the 10 most wanted list in Angband." It's her own statement that identifies her for him. She's talking about, he basically asks her, "What are you here for?" I'm looking for Túrin. Glaurung refers to him as a boaster but a craven, and asked why she was looking for him, and she said, "You lie. The children of Húrin at least are not craven. We fear you not." And so is Húrin's daughter revealed to his malice. So he didn't know that was her. But she was willing to identify herself.
Do you think that's naivete or is it pride?
Maybe a little bit of both. It's certainly she wants to say, "I'm not afraid of you either."
Right.
There is that sort of pride.
It is interesting that Glaurung called Túrin a boaster and a craven, and she says, "Nah, we're not craven."
Yeah.
But she's obviously a boaster.
Yeah. That's a very good point. She has nothing to say about the boaster part.
Right.
That's good.
That's interesting. Because
I
I think if I were to read that, just kind of read it cold without us having talked about this, I would see that as brave but misguided. Which is so much of Túrin. Naive, I think, is true too. I mean, she's suckered in by the dragon. So there's a bit of that too. But wow, that's really interesting.
Revealing your identity. I mean, we learned that in The Hobbit. It's a bad idea to say too much to a dragon.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
If you could keep your wits about you, don't tell him anything.
Right.
Oh, my name? I don't have one.
I don't. Right. Yeah. Although you got to figure maybe Bilbo knew that because of this story.
That may be true. Yeah, it may very well be. Oh yeah, we know what happened to Túrin.
I remember what a dragon did to the children of Húrin. I have that book on my shelf.
Oh man,
got a very nice Alan Lee cover.
Oh, no doubt about that. I'm sure Bilbo had plenty of copies, first editions. I'm sure.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Just a reminder before we move on about who Mablung is, because we haven't heard from him in a little while, and we saw a lot of Beleg earlier before we didn't see any more of Beleg. This was a guy. He was one of the only two messengers to the Marath Adderthad from Doriath way back when the Noldor had first come over. He was involved in the hunt for Carcharoth. He was the guy who cut the belly and gave the Silmaril to Beren.
Right, that's right.
He went with Beleg to Nirnaeth Arnoediad, again being the only two from Doriath to do that. He also
that's right. Yep, okay.
Yeah, because they didn't want part of the great.
They ended up having to march with Fingon.
Under Fingon's banner. They had allied themselves to the banner of Fingon.
Right, that's right.
He even was the one who advised Turin to seek Thingol's pardon after Cyros was killed. So, I mean, he's been involved in this. We'll see him kind of take on this Beleg type role, but not for Túrin. He's the one who's trying to help her. He's clearly he's an amazing guy. He's a real hero. He's not just a dude.
He is no slouch. He is one of the great heroes of Doriath. Yeah, that's a good point. That we need to clarify that.
Yeah, because we haven't heard from him in a little while. It's good to kind of recap him.
And I remembered him from The Hunting of the Wolf.
Oh yeah.
But I'd forgotten that he was at the Nirnaeth. So yeah,
one of only 2 at the Nirnaeth, and one of only 2 to attend the Merith Adathad. So he's very familiar with the comings and goings, and very much a traveler and a warrior. I love his name, Mablung of the Heavy Hand. I mean, you could just, this guy, Beleg fought with a bow, Mablung fights with an axe. So he's a big, strong elf.
Yeah. So. I love the Sindar and their big, strong elves. We don't really get enough of that.
No, you're right. The Noldor are all very, they have agility. They have, they fight with intelligence, but they're not, big, strong.
Right.
Like Mablung and even like Beleg. Poor Beleg. Yeah. I love Beleg.
They're like the Noldor are more like Inigo Montoya's, and the Sindar probably not quite Fezziks, but they're definitely bigger guys.
I can't just imagine. I'm just imagining a whole bunch of Fezziks walking around. Stop
Everybody move!
Everybody move! Oh, rest in peace, Andre the Giant. We loved you,
Andre. Yep.
So an orc band attacks, and everybody flees. Nienor, for some reason, decides she needs to take her clothes off first. And Mablung goes to Doriath to give the news. Why don't you read that passage for us? The one I just spoiled for everybody.
Yeah, that's right.
Sorry.
I was like, wait, I think I'm going to read this. Okay. But Nienor in that hour recovered hearing and sight, and being awakened by the cries of the orcs, she sprang up in terror, and fled ere they could come to her. Then the orcs gave chase, and the elves after. And they overtook the orcs and slew them ere they could harm her. But Nienor escaped them. For she fled, as in a madness of fear, swifter than a deer, and tore off all her clothing as she ran, until she was naked. And she passed out of their sight, running northward. And though they sought her long, they found her not, nor any trace of her. And at last, Mablung in despair returned to Menegroth and told the tidings. Then Thingol and Melian were filled with grief, but Mablung went forth, and sought long in vain for tidings of Morwen and Nienor. But Nienor ran on into the woods until she was spent, and then fell, and slept, and awoke. And it was a sunlit morning, and she rejoiced in light as it were a new thing, and all things else that she saw seemed new and strange, for she had no names for them.
My goodness, no names for anything.
Yeah.
And rejoiced in light as it were a new thing.
Isn't that cool? I love that.
It is. I mean, there's not much good that comes of this, but that certainly is a good, isn't it?
It reminds
me a bit of... Yeah, go ahead. You tell me. I want to hear
on fairy stories.
Yeah, exactly. Renewal,
recovery.
Right. The idea of
recovery of the what is it? The mundane.
Yeah.
Being able to appreciate the mundane again. Yeah.
Yeah. It totally made me think of that.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
And again, we're right there. It's great. We were both thinking of that.
Yeah. That wasn't even in our notes, folks.
It's true. I know we haven't talked about this before now. But yeah, it's just another thing of this childlike state that she's reduced to. Can't imagine being like this.
No.
And it's very sad.
It is truly sad. And you wonder, why does Tolkien have her stripping her clothes when she runs? And I think it's because there's less, literally now she has nothing at all, not even the clothes that she started with. She has nothing
connecting her to her old life.
Nothing connects her to her old life at all.
Nothing that somebody could even see and say, those clothes look like, they were made of Doriath or something like that. Or Dorloman,
Yeah, that would be, because that could be a key, yeah.
Right, exactly, yeah.
My goodness. And Mablung, just another discussion point from Children of Húrin. I've lied. I told you I was going to bring it. I'm just going to stop telling you that I'm not going to bring it up again. I love this one little line from there. Nonetheless, Mablung would not rest, and with a small company he went into the wild and for 3 years wandered far, from arid Wethrin even to the mouths of Sirion, seeking for sign or tidings of the lost. 3
Boy,
years.
that hero score just went up. I mean,
That's
really,
why, yeah.
Yeah.
He felt terrible. He was just, and Thingol was like, hey, this is not your fault. Really, he goes out there for 3 years trying to hunt them down, trying to find them.
Poor Mablung.
I know.
Poor everybody. Poor everybody. Really, in this part.
That's pretty from here on out, we just assume we're saying poor person X. Everyone we mentioned, oh, poor so-and-so.
Yeah. Did you notice, I think we might have talked about this probably long before the podcast. This might have been something we talked about. This reference to her running swifter than a deer as she's running away naked. This passage where it says she ran swifter than a deer and tore off all her clothing as she ran until she was naked.
Okay, Syros.
There, yes, exactly. The interaction right. When Túrin's troubles, all of his troubles began basically when he had this fight with Syros in Thingol's hall at Thingol's table, and Túrin kind of comes to the table. He's been fighting. He comes to the table. He's all unkempt. He looks wild, and Syros taunts him. He says, "If this is what the men of Hithlum look like," he says, "Do the women of Hithlum run like deer, clad only in their hair?"
In their hair, which of course she did.
Which of course is exactly what this woman of Hithlum does.
You are right.
And I don't know quite what to make of it, except that maybe there's a bit of some weird bit of elvish foresight that Syros has here.
It certainly wasn't an accident. I mean, he
certainly not. Yeah,
the mention of the deer is pretty clear.
Yeah. So I don't know. I kind of feel like it's just another pointer to this whole question of fate and free will that runs throughout this entire chapter.
Boy, are we going to have some fun with that or not? We're going to have
definitely
some fun.
And I don't want to spoil any of that, but I think that we're going to, these little things like
little
that.
tidbits like this that just jump out and go, oh, yeah, that ties in with that. Right. Yeah, that definitely shows a little bit of fate, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Which we'll get to. But for now, we want to find out what happens to this poor, naked gal who has been running from the orcs and from everything else, and she doesn't know they're called orcs. Okay, am I the only one who this makes me think of that moment in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy when Arthur triggers the improbability drive and a whale suddenly finds itself way up in orbit above the planet?
That's right. And
what is this? I don't have a word for
the whale's inner monologue.
Sensation of I shall call it wind.
Yeah.
What is this large
big thing coming up to meet me?
It's very round. I'll call it ground.
Yeah, ground. That was it. That's right. Yeah, it looks round. I'll call it ground.
I wonder if it will be my friend.
Splat.
I did kind of have that come to mind, and sometimes that's a shame because really I shouldn't be thinking of funny things like that at moments like this. But hopefully that'll provide a laugh. We've talked before about how sometimes we have to really lighten the mood.
Sometimes you just have to find something to laugh at.
Yeah, because this chapter doesn't have any of those moments at all.
Right.
This is all dark.
And I hope our listeners know by now that we have laughs with it because we love this material. We have
deeply.
laughs with it because we're just so happy to be talking about it that we're having a good time. It's not.
There is that. Yeah.
It's not an indication of
Oh no,
we're not making fun of the material.
No, not at all. We have, and I know our listeners understand this. We have a deep respect for the text. We have a deep respect for what Christopher Tolkien did in getting this book out and published from piles and piles of manuscripts. We do this. We kind of bring in these other references to be funny, to make it entertaining. You're going to listen to two guys talk about Tolkien for an hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours. We got to do something. Otherwise this is going to be the Learn How to Sleep in a Hurry podcast.
Yeah. You guys can read these 9 pages in a very short time.
Yeah.
But you're listening to us talk about it. Hopefully you're enjoying what we bring to it.
Hopefully. So let's find out what happens to this poor gal.
Yep.
But it was a great storm of thunder that came up from the south, and in terror she cast herself down upon the mound of Houghton Eleth, stopping her ears from the thunder. But the rain smote her and drenched her, and she lay like a wild beast that is dying. There Turambar found her, as he came to the crossings of Teglin, having heard rumor of orcs that roamed near. And seeing in a flare of lightning the body, as it seemed, of a slain maiden, lying upon the mound of Finduilas. He was stricken to the heart. But the woodman lifted her up, and Turambar cast his cloak about her, and they took her to a lodge nearby and warmed her, and gave her food. And as soon as she looked upon Turambar, she was comforted, for it seemed to her that she had found at last something that she had sought in her darkness, and she would not be parted from him. But when he asked her concerning her name and her kin and her misadventure, then she became troubled, as a child that perceives that something is demanded, but cannot understand what it may be, and she wept. Therefore Turambar said, "Do not be troubled, the tale shall wait, but I will give you a name, and I will call you Niniel, Tear Maiden." And at that name she shook her head, but said, Niniel. That was the first word she spoke after her darkness, and it remained her name among the woodmen ever after. Niniel.
Niniel.
It kind of made me think of when Finduilas gave Túrin a name that was awfully close to Túrin.
The name Thurin. Yeah.
Túrin. Not quite as on the nose, but...
This keeps happening. And the similarity of Niniel to Nienor, and they even have similar meanings.
Right.
Tear Maiden and Nienor means mourning. I feel like this... Somebody's trying to jog their memories, I think. I think this is Iluvatar, fate, kind of stepping in and,
giving them a chance.
Putting these words in their mouths, in the hopes that maybe she'll hear it and say, Niniel, shake her head, and I think, no, my name is Nienor.
Right.
Or the same thing with Túrin. Even down to the name Turambar that he bears now, you would think that she might find some similarity between that and her brother's name, if she remembered. But yeah, it's fascinating how similar the names are.
Yeah, it really is.
And it makes for a nice alliteration, which probably was very convenient when Tolkien was writing this as alliterative verse.
That's true. He probably did have to come up with a second name that was alliterative.
Yeah. Did we talk about? I have a random note here because I wasn't sure where else to fit it. Did we talk about Turambar last time? I know we talked about the meaning,
but we talked about it at some point. Oh no, I know we talked about the meaning, but I don't know
meaning
we
of
talked
the meaning of Master of Fate.
Right.
Turambar means Master of Fate. Master of Doom. Interesting thing I found. I'll just put this out there just because I thought it was really fascinating. Interesting thing I found in History of Middle-earth was that at one point in the development of the mythology, Tolkien had given Morgoth the title Tarumbar. Same exact consonants. The only thing is that the first A and the first U are switched. And Tarumbar means King of the World.
I'm sorry, I had a Titanic moment in my
Leo
head.
DiCaprio?
I'm Tarumbar.
You see Morgoth standing at the prow of the ship with this.
I'm Tarumbar.
Oh man, that's terrible.
That is terrible. That's a mashup. It never should happen.
Yeah, no. But it was fascinating because I think there are a number of things that kind of show weird little parallels between Túrin and Morgoth. I think they were very clearly intended as, literary foils for each other, real sort of opposites. Similar sins, I think, similar sins of pride. And going back to Turambar, there's actually even a passage we talked about, I think probably when we did the previous chapter, because it's on page 197, where Morgoth calls himself Melkor, Master of the Fates of Arda, which very clearly parallels Turambar, Master of Doom, Master of Fates. Yeah. Anyway, I don't really have much to say about it. I just wanted to throw it out there because I thought it was fascinating.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
I think it is too. I don't know that there's much there beyond what she said, but...
Yeah. And certainly Tolkien only used that name once in all the 12 volumes of History of Middle-earth.
So it's not one that stuck. But
not something that he stuck with, but just to think that he was even thinking about it for one moment is neat.
Master of the Fates versus Master of Fate. For Melkor calling it. Yeah, you're right. There are those little bit of parallels. They're not as strong as the Feanor Melkor parallels, which I think are
true. That is very true.
They hit you over the head.
Well, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later too.
Right.
I think
just the
differences between Feanor as the sins of Feanor versus the sins of Túrin.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting discussion. So they take her back to the woodman. She's healed and she's taught to speak again. She ends up, of course,
as to an infant.
Yes, as to an infant.
Yeah.
She has no words.
Yeah.
She doesn't even know how to speak.
Yeah.
I thought of this because I think probably the first time I read this book, I wouldn't have comprehended this, but having small children, this idea that she became troubled as a child, that perceives that something's demanded but can't understand what it may be. You get that, don't you? You understand what it's like when your kid maybe is 2 and you're trying to explain something to him and he knows that you want him to do something, but he can't grasp what it is you want him to do.
Yeah. And they get
how
frustrated
they get,
Yeah.
that inability to communicate either receptively or expressively. And in her case, obviously she had both an inability to, she couldn't understand. If she didn't know how to speak the words, she didn't know what the words meant. So she's being asked a question, and she doesn't even know she's being asked a question.
Right.
So
can't imagine how frustrating it must be.
I mean, can you imagine adults? As a child, you have no words, you have no language, and all of a sudden, adults are treating you like you're an adult.
Yeah.
I mean, we treat kids like they're kids, so we understand, and we don't, ask them deep questions and well, tell me about your kin and your misadventure and what's your name.
Right, but to just find this grown woman in on the hill and not know anything about her, and you're just speaking to her like an adult.
She can speak,
Yeah.
Man,
that's very interesting.
It really is, but it made me think, oh yeah, I kind of get what that's like now. So she's taught to speak as an infant. She falls in love with Turambar, but Brandir loves her, and we've talked about friend zone before. I'm going to bring in a Children of Húrin line. Then Brandir grew to love her, and when she grew strong, she would lend him her arm for his lameness, and she called him her brother.
Ooh.
That's worse than being friend zoned. You're like a brother to me. Ouch.
Oh, that's the worst. That's worse than I can talk to you just like you're one of my girlfriends.
Oh, that's terrible. That's terrible.
Man,
you're like a brother to me.
The sting of those words, man.
Yeah, and how really sad that is, because her brother is the one that should be like a brother to her.
That is so true.
The irony of that.
The incredible layers upon layers of irony there. Wow.
Oh,
man,
goodness.
yeah. So the guy who loves her, she thinks of like her brother, and the guy who's her brother, she loves.
Yep. Oops.
Man.
Goodness. Well,
that's poor Brandir.
Isn't it?
Poor Brandir.
There's a lot of pity for Brandir here.
Yeah, and
until later.
Yeah, that's true. But also, notice already we're seeing some parallels to Gwyndor here.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
With Túrin and Finduilas.
Yes, and Brandir and Gwyndor. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very much so. So what happens here with that very much parallels Gwyndor? Can you take that next paragraph for us?
Yep. In that time, the woodmen were not troubled by the orcs, and Turambar went not to war, and there was peace in Brethil. His heart turned to Nienor, and he asked her in marriage. But for that time she delayed in spite of her love. For Brandir foreboded he knew not what, and sought to restrain her, rather for her sake than his own or rivalry with Turambar. And he revealed to her that Turambar was Túrin, son of Húrin. And though she knew not the name, a shadow fell upon her mind.
Just like before, right? There was, earlier it was the other way around. There was something about him, right? She'd found at last something she'd sought.
Yes.
Well, now there's this shadow. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Again, it's like
that's just be thinking about this.
Something is in there scraping to get out of her mind.
Yes, the truth.
Something is locked away and it's trying to get out.
The truth's crawling and scratching the walls and going, help.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Yeah. And so Brandir, just like Gwyndor, reveals Turambar's... I keep calling him Turambar. Is it Turambar or Turambar?
I think it's Turambar just because there's 2 consonants after the penult.
Yeah.
So I think the stress is on the penult there.
Instead of on the antepenult.
Somebody correct us if we're wrong there. But
I'll probably keep calling him Turambar. I don't know why. I just... but yes,
I do. I kind of... Yeah, I do.
Yeah, we go back and forth. So, but like Gwyndor, he reveals the true name of Túrin to his love interests, who he cares about. It's very Gwyndorish.
Very much parallel, yeah.
Except he does some things later that Gwyndor I don't think would have done.
Probably not.
So,
but here it just falls upon deaf ears because she has no idea. I mean, we talked about it. She feels it. She feels something, but she doesn't know who Túrin is. Those words have no meaning to her.
That's right. That's absolutely right. I mean, they have some sort of subconscious meaning, but that's as close as we get.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and take the next paragraph. But when 3 years were past since the sack of Nargothrond, Turambar asked Nienor again, and vowed that now he would wed her or else go back to war in the wild. And Nienor took him with joy, and they were wedded at the midsummer, and the woodmen of Brethil made a great feast. But ere the end of the year, Glaurung sent orcs of his dominion against Brethil, and Turambar sat at home deedless, for he had promised to Nienor that he would go to battle only if their homes were assailed. But the woodmen were worsted, and Dorless upbraided him that he would not aid the people that he had taken for his own. Then Turambar arose and brought forth again his black sword, and he gathered a great company of the men of Brethil, and they defeated the orcs utterly. But Glaurung heard tidings that the black sword was in Brethil, and he pondered what he heard, devising new evil. Because dragon. I mean, really, that's just about it. That's what I do. What do you do in your spare time? Well, I like to take walks on the beach and devise new evil.
Count my gold, devise new evil,
Take naps. Yeah.
Take naps.
And once again, put away the black sword, put away the dragon helm of Dorloman. If you want to remain kind of secret, then remain secret.
Yeah. There's a little element of like the gunslinger in the Western here, like he tried to, it's like Tombstone or something, Wyatt Earp just wanted to retire, but the bad guys come back, and he's got to take the guns down off the shelf again.
Yeah.
There's a cool heroism to it, but I see what you're saying. If he's really trying to.
But you were fighting with the spear before. You could still fight with the spear.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's true. There's other things you can fight with besides your black sword.
Well, though, we'll find out that the black sword is probably the best weapon you could use against Glaurung.
No, that's true.
Yeah, so, there's a lot here that reminded me of Finduilas. We talked about the Gwyndor connection, but there's this reminder of Finduilas when he finds her, going back to that.
Oh, that's right. The way he found her on the mound.
Found her on the mound.
Finduilas was buried, and his heart was he stricken to the heart?
Stricken to the heart, or something along those lines.
Yeah.
It was great stopping her ears. She became.
Yeah, but imagine while you're looking for that. Okay, there you go.
Stricken to the heart.
Yeah, I mean, just imagine seeing the mound where someone you cared about was buried, and then you see someone lying on top of it
who looks a lot like her.
Who looks a lot like her.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean. Yeah, I mean, you think you've seen a ghost for a split second,
Yeah, and he has. I think this is another interesting time because we see, when he brings her back, he puts his cloak on her. They warm her up. They give her food. All this, and I know we're kind of going back a couple paragraphs, but I meant to bring this up. Then we see his compassion again, his pity. He has this. There's part of Túrin that still has this really good, compassionate and side of empathy, which is why it's so surprising that he can still make such foolish decisions.
He makes such bad decisions
that are selfish, right?
Because he does have good motivations a lot of the time.
Sometimes, yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes he has bad motivations, but sometimes he does have good ones, and there, he does have some very positive traits. He is compassionate. He does have a strong sense of justice, as we'll talk about later.
And as we'll see later.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's very interesting. It occurs to me, again, I'm still stuck by stuck on this concept of how childlike she is in this state. And there is something here about just his persistence in asking her to marry him.
Yeah.
And I know she is a grown woman. She's learned to speak again, but there is something a little off-putting to me about that.
A little oddly pushy.
Yeah, a little pushy and a little creepy when you consider that you found this woman in the wild, naked and unable to speak.
You should probably find out more about her.
Yeah, Yeah.
Trust me, Túrin. You need to find out a little more.
You really should find out more about her. Or at least find a Han Solo to step in and win her away before you kiss her again.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
goodness.
But I don't know. There's just a weird creepiness. How did I know
Luke and Leia were going to come up? And
of course they
kiss.
They had to.
Yeah.
They had to. I've been waiting 21 chapters for that.
Seriously. Well, they did a little bit more than kiss, because in the spring of the year after, Nienor conceived. Yep. So we do need to be, we're not going to read that whole paragraph, but I did want to touch on that point plus this next one. This is a telling line. Turambar sent out scouts far afield, for now he ordered things as he would, and few gave heed to Brandir. Does this sound familiar?
Yeah. It's Nargothrond all over again.
All over again, and he ends up in charge. Mm-hmm. But I have to say, as your reading's about to tell us, he does take some of that wisdom into account, doesn't he?
He does, yeah. And I'll go read that. They sought therefore the counsel of Turambar, and he counseled them that it was vain to go against Glaurung with all their force, for only by cunning and good fortune could they defeat him. He offered therefore himself to seek the dragon on the borders of the land, and bade the rest of the people to remain at Ethel Brandir, but to prepare for flight. For if Glaurung had the victory, he would come first to the woodmen's homes to destroy them, and they could not hope to withstand him. But if they then scattered far and wide, then many might escape, for Glaurung would not take up his dwelling in Brethil, and would return soon to Nargothrond. Then Turambar asked for companions willing to aid him in his peril, and Dorlas stood forth, but no others. Therefore Dorlas upbraided the people, and spoke scorn of Brandir, who could not play the part of the heir of the house of Haleth. And Brandir was shamed before his people, and was bitter at heart. But Hunthor, kinsman of Brandir, asked his leave to go in his stead. Then Turambar said farewell to Nienor, and she was filled with fear and foreboding, and their parting was sorrowful. But Turambar set out with his 2 companions, and went to Nengirith.
Yeah. Well, Dorlas is good at upbraiding. This is the second time he's upbraided.
Twice in 2 pages that
First
he's upbraided
he upbraids
somebody.
Túrin, and now he's upbraiding the people.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dorlas.
I mean, he's calling people on stuff that they need to be called on. I'll give him that.
Yeah,
but
he does
his later actions kind of lose me.
They kind of do. And in the novel, he's a little bit, the full length version, he's a little bit nastier. About Brandir. I mean, he really kind of goes over the top in criticizing Brandir, who's lame from birth. I mean, he's got a birth defect that he can't be the warrior leader that that Túrin would be, for instance.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because I was just thinking about the parallels to Nargothrond, and with Orodreth we saw a weak leader. Right. He's an elf. He should have been able to fight, but he was just a weak leader. Brandir is he makes mistakes, certainly, but his weakness is physical. It's I don't know what to make of it. But it's just an interesting contrast between him and Orodreth. I mean, there are times when Brandir, I think, strikes me as he actually is somebody who could be a good leader. But then there are times where he doesn't. So let's not go too far down that road. But man, there just are no good guys in this chapter, are there? Except Mablung.
Mablung's about the only one. I mean, in terms of like really, truly, purely good. Yeah, I'm looking up the Dorlas stuff in Children of Húrin, and he, it's pretty.
He's a lot nastier, and as we see, Dorlas he's just a big talker,
He is. I'll go with you, Lord, for I would ever go forward rather than wait for a foe. Well, we'll see about that.
Yeah, we'll see about that.
He talks about the House of Haleth being put to shame, and so Brandir is scorned and bitter. But yeah, Hunthor actually has a line in Children of Húrin that's worth saying. He says, "You do evilly, Dorlas, to speak thus to the shame of your lord, whose limbs by ill hazard cannot do as his heart would. Beware lest the contrary be seen in you at some turn."
Ooh, interesting foreshadowing,
isn't it? And how can it be said that his counsels were vain when they were never taken? You, his liege, have ever set them at naught. I say to you that Glaurung comes now to us, as to Nargothrond before, because our deeds have betrayed us, as he feared. But since this woe is now come, with your leave, son of Handir, I will go on behalf of Hala's house. So,
okay.
Major respect there to
Hunthor. Yeah, I felt like I thought I knew Hunthor better than I get to know him in this chapter, and it must. It's from that.
It's from that I'm the full version, or the Narn. The Narn goes into the.
Yeah, the Narn is very similar to that. There's another situation. We see a little bit of. We get some. I think there's sympathy for Brandir. The novel evokes sympathy for Brandir.
It does.
And I do. That's kind of why I think Brandir is somebody who could have been a good leader, maybe in different circumstances.
He was desperately trying to be a good leader.
He really was. He did try. He had physical limitations. He wasn't an Orodreth who was held back by his own.
His hesitancy or
his hesitancy, his failure to. Yeah, his failure to. Yeah, exactly. Brandir really wanted to do things, and he tries. He does. He risks physical harm. We'll see it in just a moment.
Not too long from now that he does. Yeah, there is something to be. You're right. We lose a little bit in this shortened version in terms of our sympathy for Brandir. Even the action at the end that Brandir takes that's deeply wrong.
Kind of where we lose him.
Yeah. It seems a little more justifiable in the novel version. Still not right, but maybe it goes from first-degree murder to second-degree murder. I don't know. It seems a little bit more.
If it's the one we're thinking of, I might have some thoughts on that.
Yeah,
but
we'll chat about that one. I think that's actually where I had intended to bring in some more stuff from Children of Húrin.
We just can't stop ourselves.
Yeah, it was the part where I thought, well, golly, I guess I'll bring in 2 sections from Children of Húrin. Never mind, I think I brought in 7, but we'll see.
Two sections per passage that we read from the Silmarillion.
So we also get the parting of Turambar and Nienor. And it's sorrowful, and she's filled with fear and foreboding. So
she knows it's not going to end well.
No, and
probably not quite how she thinks, but
and she can't wait much longer. So she ends up leading with a great company. Brandir basically says, "Fine."
Here we see her again.
Yeah.
Again, I just see this kind of just more of this rashness.
It is.
The fearlessness that's not a good kind of fearlessness.
Yeah.
Not knowing when to.
It doesn't act
to
in
stay
wisdom.
home and be safe.
Yeah.
I mean, she's pregnant. Let's keep that in mind.
That's true.
She really probably shouldn't be,
And she's going against her husband's wishes, not only with her own life, but with the lives of all these other people she's leading there. Remember, he told them, you guys stay here. And if Glaurung comes your way, scatter so that more of you can live.
Yeah.
Going with 3 guys, going with 100 guys is not going to matter. We're probably going to die in doing what we're doing, but only a small group of us can succeed. There's no point in having a bunch of you come. So stay where you're at, and she ends up not staying.
And she doesn't do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So of course Brandir tries to talk her out of it. She doesn't listen. He renounces his lordship. We're done. He puts on a sword and falls, and follows after her, but he can't follow very quickly, so he falls behind. Which is sad. So
that's very sad. Yeah,
it is. You feel, again, very badly for him. Yeah, very sad. We get a description here of kind of this location of Nen Girith. It's a river gorge. Túrin thinks that Glaurung's going to have to pass over the gorge. So his idea, and then we get that in description in these paragraphs here, is that they're going to get down into the ravine, go over the river, and climb up underneath the dragon, because, of course, that's where dragons are vulnerable.
It's on their belly.
Yep. But we see that the heart of Dorlus failed when they came to Teglin, so he didn't attempt the crossing but drew back. We come to that later more.
There's where Mr. All Talk. Dorlos the Upbraider is unmanned.
The Upbraider. Oh, man. Nathan the Wronged, Dorlos the Upbraider. Oh, goodness. So Turambar and Hunthor continue. Dragon wakes up and starts to come across. Sadly, as they're climbing Yeah.
This is a great passage. I know we're not going to read it,
I know.
but I mean, just this, cast his forward part across the chasm and began to draw his bulk after.
Humongous
worm just throwing himself across this chasm and just, drawing his bulk after. There's such a sense of just very slow motion, this massive creature just pulling himself across.
And just the earth shaking and the trees. I mean, we do find in the novel version that he burns the trees on the other side first. He casts, does his dragon thing and wipes out all the trees so there's a landing spot. And then he jumps over. So Turambar and Hunthor are climbing up. They're trying to get there. Hunthor is killed by a rock that comes down, hits him on the head and puts him in the river. I do love that little line that he gets. So he ended of the House of Haleth, not the least valiant.
Not the least valiant,
Yeah, good stuff.
And he's a guy we know nothing about.
I know, just nothing at all, other than the fact that he comes to the defense of his lord and kinsman.
And just those little bits you know about him, man.
Well, he's obviously got courage. Know more.
Absolutely.
Because Dorless the Upbraider.
Right.
You could tell we're kind of moving at a fast pace. And that's because, of course, we're not reading every word, but we want to leave enough room at the end to discuss some really big topics. So we're moving through this fairly quickly, but hopefully we're not moving too fast for you. I'm going to go ahead and take the next 3 paragraphs here. So Here we go. This is the critical moment.
Oh, yes.
This is the good stuff. Then Turambar summoned all his will and courage and climbed the cliff alone and came beneath the dragon. Then he drew Gurthang, and with all the might of his arm and of his hate, he thrust it into the soft belly of the worm, even up to the hilts. But when Glaurung felt his death pang, he screamed, and in his dreadful throe he heaved up his bulk and hurled himself across the chasm, and there lay lashing and coiling in his agony. And he set all in a blaze about him, and beat all to ruin, until at last his fires died, and he lay still. Now Gurthang had been wrested from Turambar's hand in the throe of Glaurung, and it clave to the belly of the dragon. Turambar therefore crossed the water once more, desiring to recover his sword and to look upon his foe. And he found him stretched at his length, and rolled upon one side, and the hilts of Gurthang stood in his belly. Then Turambar seized the hilts, and set his foot upon the belly, and cried in mockery of the dragon in his words at Nargothrond, "Hail, worm of Morgoth! Well met again! Die now, and the darkness have thee! Thus is Túrin, son of Húrin, avenged." Then he wrenched out the sword, but a spout of black blood followed it, and fell on his hand, and the venom burned it. And thereupon Glaurung opened his eyes, and looked upon Turambar with such malice that it smote him as a blow. And by that stroke and the anguish of the venom, he fell into a dark swoon, and lay as one dead, and his sword was beneath him.
Man.
Heroic moment. This is the heroic moment.
Very heroic moment, yeah. I'll come back to this one later on.
Boy, you're not kidding.
But it's such a great moment.
I mean, this is what puts him in the pantheon of
absolutely
of the heroes right here, the slaying of Glaurung.
Yeah, right, exactly.
This is no joke.
It's something significant enough to not overlook his other deeds, but remember him as a great hero with a footnote.
Yes.
This is a significant thing. I mean, this is the first dragon.
Yeah.
This is the first dragon
and
slaying.
the father of all dragons. This is him in his prime,
Yeah. And this is one man.
Yeah.
I guess it is frequently one man who ends up killing the dragon, but still one man fighting alone, standing alone, in melee combat.
Yeah. I mean, this is not.
This isn't barred with an arrow.
A black arrow. No, this is standing underneath with the dragon
with
stench.
The stench and the rumbling and the fire and the heat.
Oh.
And summoning your courage and driving your sword upward into his belly.
What a moment.
This is powerful.
This is. And I will admit this would be a moment that I would be looking forward to if they were to make a movie. I don't want them to. I know we keep saying that. I don't want them to. I really don't. But I'd still go see it. And this would be could be a pretty darn good moment. Of course we would.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we would mock
we'd
all
say
the
it was
weaknesses.
just for podcast research, but no.
Yeah, we're not going to go to a midnight showing in our 40s just because of podcast research.
No.
But we would end up, of course, mocking it, over and over again for its shortcomings. But yeah, this would be quite the cinematic moment. Glaurung just setting ablaze everything on the other side of the river.
Everything on the other side, amazing.
It's interesting that the strategy of his approach is so radically different from his usual preferences, isn't it? He wants the open battle, but not this time.
He lies in wait, and he hides.
He's learned
he fights
something.
Stealth. That is true.
Yeah.
That's a good point. I never thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's still sword and targe, minus the targe. It's not like he's fighting from the forest with a bow, but he's not doing the open battle, which got him into trouble before. So there is that. I mean, he
Although
really
he
does
still has to look.
some.
He still has to look on his foe before the end, though,
ding,
doesn't
ding,
he?
ding. I was going there. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
What is the point? Isn't the point here to kill Glaurung and not to gloat over
Not
Glaurung?
to mock him and gloat. Yeah.
Don't you know better by now? Don't you know the last time he looked at you that you were basically frozen, paralyzed? That this was, he rolled a natural 20 and you were stuck for hours while Finduilas walked by screaming your name?
Yeah. Yeah.
Roll your, what's your saving throw against dragon?
What's your saving throw against dragon spells?
Terrible.
Yeah.
Terrible.
Yeah,
because either Glaurung's already dead and you're mocking a corpse, which is kind of pointless. Or he's alive, in which case he'll hear you.
You're still at risk.
You're in danger, right?
Yeah, exactly.
This would be where you'd think a little bit more wisdom would have been handy.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's unfortunate.
Well, and it reveals how much this is how much he's doing this for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
It's a great deed that he does. He kills Glaurung, father of dragons, and he's remembered as a hero for it. But he doesn't do it to strike a great blow for the Edain. He does it because he has a personal vendetta against the dragon. And he does it, he says, for vengeance. Thus is Túrin, son of Húrin, avenged. So he's doing the right thing. I think somewhat for the wrong reasons, and I think that's important.
I'm so sorry. I'm having a Galaxy Quest moment.
Oh no! What happened?
Avenged.
Oh, by Grabthar's hammer, by the sons of Morwen, you shall be avenged.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I could not.
Oh man.
I didn't catch that when I was reading it, but avenged just does something to me and brings back Alan Rickman, another
Rickman,
who we must say rest in peace, Alan Rickman.
Yeah.
This is
man. He would have been. He's a little old, but he would have been a great Túrin in his youth.
Oh, wouldn't he? In his Die Hard days? Yeah.
Yeah.
A little skinny, a little kind of.
He could have bulked up a little bit.
He would have needed to bulk up to be Túrin.
Yeah.
But yeah, kind of that, just with that slight arrogance and swagger that he had.
Yeah. I'm thinking of him in, and this wasn't a very good movie, but the Robin Hood movie where he played.
Oh golly, no, that wasn't a very good movie. But yeah, you're right. The sheriff of Nottingham.
He was a cool sheriff of Nottingham.
He was an excellent sheriff. And at least his British accent stayed consistent, unlike Kevin Costner.
Unlike Robin Hood.
Oh my goodness, though. Robin Costner. He did.
Yeah.
Oh boy, that was bad. Just why mock? Why do this? But I get it. This is a personal thing. But that's okay because Glaurung's going to make it personal now too.
Oh yes, he is.
So Glaurung screams, and everybody thinks that the dragon is victorious. I mean, he's just destroying everything, and of course, Nienor sits and kind of freezes. She locks up. So what happens at that point?
Even so,
the segue. Oh, sorry.
Yes. I picked it up. For once. I picked up on the subtle segue.
I can't believe I did that to you. I'm so sorry, my friend. All right. I'm going to let you go.
No, that's all right.
Do that again.
Because usually I'm like, what do you want me to read now?
That's kind of what I was waiting for.
Am I supposed to read now?
No, we're supposed to talk about siege engines.
Talk about siege warfare. Oh, man. Okay, here we go. Next paragraph.
There you go.
Even so, Brandir found her, for he came to Nen-Girith at last, limping wearily. And when he heard that the dragon had crossed the river and had beaten down his foes, his heart yearned towards Niniel in pity. Yet he thought also, Turambar is dead, but Niniel lives. Now it may be that she will come with me, and I will lead her away, and so we shall escape from the dragon together. After a while, therefore, he stood by Niniel, and he said, Come, it is time to go. If you will, I will lead you. And he took her hand, and she arose silently and followed him. And in the darkness none saw them go. But as they went down the path to the crossings, the moon rose, and cast a grey light on the land. And Niniel said, Is this the way? And Brandir answered that he knew no way, save to flee as they might from Glaurung, and escape into the wild. But Niniel said, The black sword was my beloved and my husband. To seek him only do I go. What else could you think? And she sped on before him. Thus she came towards the crossings of Teglin, and beheld Houghton Nelith in the white moonlight, and great dread came on her.
Great dread.
Great dread.
For good reason. Great dread for good reason.
There's a... Yeah?
Yeah. We're going to see some more here in a little bit. I wanted to touch briefly on Brandir's discovery of her and kind of his motivation. It does seem like he just, he wants to protect her. He's like, okay, well now, she's got nobody to protect her. There's less of, ooh, my rival is dead, and more of, she's got nobody now, and she's going to be, she's pregnant. I'll rescue her. Obviously, rescuing her will then endear her to me.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think that's his thought process here is, the pity of her now being without her husband.
Maybe so. I'd like to think so, but I don't know. I'm
trying to give the benefit of the doubt.
I always see a little bit of opportunism here.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I mean, this is her husband and father of her child that that she assumes is dead, and
yeah.
First thing is now it may be that she will come with me.
Right. Of course, what I want to tell him is it's too soon, dude.
Right, exactly.
I mean,
yeah.
This is not. You don't hit on the widow at the funeral, man.
Right.
That just ain't right. You got to give her some time.
Exactly. Some time.
Golly, man.
Yeah,
not 5 minutes. That's not enough.
Yeah. It's not even at the funeral. This is the scene of the accident.
Yeah, exactly. Oh,
so,
my
I don't
goodness.
know. I want to think the best. I definitely think he does want to rescue. He really does genuinely care about her.
He does.
It's
yeah.
not.
He loves
he's not
her.
Just trying to. Yeah, he's not just trying to hone in on his rival's territory.
Right.
But it's just.
Of course, she loves him too, like a brother.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
Oh goodness.
Yeah. That's right. I guess now's my chance to get out of the friend zone, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, or at least graduate from brother zone.
Right. Exactly.
Oh goodness, I'd take friend zone after that. Really, at least I've got a shot still.
Yeah.
Well, so what does she see? I'm going to go ahead and take starting in the next paragraph, partway in that first line here.
All right.
She came to the ruin of Glaurung, nigh the brink of Cabin and Arras. There she saw the dragon lying, but she heeded him not, for a man lay beside him. And she ran to Turambar and called his name in vain. Then finding that his hand was burned, she washed it with tears and bound it about with a strip of her raiment. And she kissed him and cried on him again to awake. Thereat Glaurung stirred for the last time ere he died, and he spoke with his last breath, saying, Hail, Nienor, daughter of Húrin. We meet again ere the end. I give thee joy that thou hast found thy brother at last. And now thou shalt know him, a stabber in the dark, treacherous to foes, faithless to friends, and a curse unto his kin, Túrin, son of Húrin. But the worst of all his deeds thou shalt feel in thyself. Then Glaurung died, and the veil of his malice was taken from her, and she remembered all the days of her life. Looking down upon Túrin, she cried, "Farewell, O twice beloved! Ah, Túrin Turambar, Túrin Ambartanen, master of doom by doom mastered, oh, happy to be dead!" Then Brandir, who had heard all, standing stricken upon the edge of ruin, hastened towards her. But she ran from him, distraught with horror and anguish, and coming to the brink of Cabed and Aras, she cast herself over and was lost in the wild water. Wow, the hits just keep coming. I
think this might be the worst one for me
in
the chapter.
It is. Yeah.
Nienor is the closest thing to an innocent victim I think the story has.
Yeah, we're going to get to more of that as we discuss moral culpability and the curse and all that, but she definitely is the closest thing you get to an innocent bystander. You're right. Mm-hmm. And it is heartbreaking. That moment where she remembered all the days of her life, they all come back to her. Oh, just that pain. I can't even fathom.
No, you can't. I mean,
overwhelming emotions of sorrow and remorse and grief, and is
horror and anguish. Distraught with horror and anguish.
Yeah, is ew an emotion? Because ew. I mean, that would, and yet at the same time, you'd remember that you loved him as. Right, as somebody else, too. As a person different than you weren't you were Niniel, not Nienor at that point. You didn't know, and so you loved him in both of these ways, and yet of course you know how deeply wrong that is, and then she horror and anguish and one can hardly blame her.
The worst of all his deeds thou shalt feel in thyself. That's just it's heartbreaking. It just really is.
And this is why I think, folks, we warned you from the very beginning that this was a deeply dark chapter. This is for first time readers. This is a story that just it punches you in the stomach, and then when you think it's done, it punches you in the face.
Just punches you again, again,
and over.
Yeah. Her last words to Túrin, though. She remember the wisdom she had before the spell. She speaks with that wisdom again. The
master of doom by doom
Túrin Turambar, Túrin Ambartanen, master of doom by doom mastered. There's this thing again. We'll talk a little bit about the notion of this as a tragedy later on. Like a Greek tragedy, and there's always this thing in the classic Greek tragedies where the hero always ends up doing the opposite of what they intend, and she really just spells that right out for us. He spent his whole life trying to master his doom, and he has been mastered by it.
Oh, just and
what do you do? Like you said, what do you do at that point? What can she do at that point?
You're right. Continuing on with life is, it's a different act than what we'll see coming up, but it's still very sorrowful. Yeah. Brandir wants to do the same, but he can't do it. He can't find the courage to leap in. Which is interesting. But we do get, and we're not going to read that little intervening paragraph, but we do get this beautiful new name. We've talked about this before with the Houghton and Eleth. That this gets a new beautiful name, the Cabed Nidamarth.
Cabed Nidamarth.
The leap of dreadful doom. Which it's a beautiful name in Sindarin, not such a beautiful name in the common tongue. Yeah. So, so now Brandir, since he can't jump into the river, what does he end up doing?
I will read.
Thank you for telling me that.
But Brandir made his way back to Nengirith to bring tidings to the people. And he met Dorlus in the woods and slew him, the first blood that ever he had spilled, and the last. And he came to Nengirith, and men cried to him, "Have you seen her? For Niniel is gone." And he answered, "Niniel is gone forever, The dragon is dead, and Turambar is dead, and those tidings are good. The people murmured at these words, saying that he was crazed. But Brandir said, Hear me to the end. Niniel the beloved is also dead. She cast herself into Teglin, desiring life no more. For she learned that she was none other than Nienor, daughter of Húrin of Dorloman, ere her forgetfulness came upon her, and that Turambar was her brother, Túrin, son of Húrin.
Goodness.
And then that's when the people collectively went, ew.
Yeah. Their eyes get all big, their jaws drop.
Yeah.
Whoa, that's a bad thing.
Didn't see that coming.
No, didn't see that coming. You're right. Speaking of didn't see it coming, poor Dorlas. There is this is where I wanted to bring in a little bit from Children of Húrin again. There's a really nasty little confrontation between Brandir and Dorlas. Basically, Brandir's asking Dorlas for information, and Dorlas doesn't know. And Brandir realizes that Dorlas had deserted his companions in fear, and he shames him. And he says what I think is truth. He says, You are the begetter of our woes, egging on the black sword, bringing the dragon upon us, putting me to scorn, drawing Hunthor to his death, and then you flee to skulk in the woods. So, yeah, there's some good conversation there. He realizes that if Dorlas had come out of hiding sooner and given tidings to Niniel, or to Nienor, she wouldn't have seen the dragon and learned the truth about Túrin.
Oh, yeah.
She would have found, So,
you would have if you would have just come, if you had not been such a coward.
Right. You would have come out, Niniel would have seen you. I'm Nienor. I keep calling her Niniel, but yeah.
Yeah.
She would have, you would have been able to tell her what's going on, and she wouldn't have ended up running into the dragon and having him say, Oh, by the way, Nienor, Túrin, Nienor. Oh, you know each other already.
I believe you know each other.
Biblically.
You have known each other.
So, Dorlas makes ready to punch Brandir, which is, okay, I get it. Dorlas doesn't like Brandir. He's going to knock him out. Brandir pulls a sword and kills him.
Okay, so it's a bit more of an act of self-defense there.
Well,
not against a punch, I guess.
Against a punch, yeah. I wouldn't call it that. It's basically Dorlas is about to, cold cock him, and the next thing you know, he's got a sword in him.
Yeah. The other thing I thought of with this, though, because I didn't go back and reread The Children of Húrin. I'm glad you did. Remember, Brandir is still Dorlas's lord.
Yeah, this is his king, so to speak. Yeah, his lord.
Right. And Dorlas is technically a deserter.
Oh, yeah.
So not technically, he was a deserter.
He was absolutely a deserter.
Yeah, and I think it's just because we recently had that discussion with Simon Tolkien, and read that book, and there's there's stuff in that about seeing men get executed for desertion or for cowardice.
Yeah.
This is something that Tolkien would have seen before.
Oh,
so there's that aspect of it too. I still don't think Brandir's a good guy for this. I think it's more than he needed to do, but
way more. And he did it out of anger because of
he did do it out of anger. That's true. He didn't do it out of a desire to see justice done. That's true.
And it wasn't self-defense either. I mean, a punch, that's never bring a fist to a sword fight.
Never bring a fist to a sword fight. Yeah. I don't know. Dorlas has done so much talking in his life. Maybe he's talked
himself up so much that my fists are deadly weapons.
Yeah.
No.
You're right. It really is not at all an act of self-defense. I think in a certain regard, Dorlas had it coming, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, definitely. That's okay. Brandir's got something coming too, so we'll get to that.
Boy, does he.
In fact, I think we'll get to that next. Túrin wakes up, sees that he's got some Bactine and a Band-Aid on his hand. And so he's like, well, wait a minute, who did this? So he's calling out, and long story short, he ends up finding his way back home. And when the people saw him, they drew back in fear, thinking that it was his unquiet spirit. And he said, Nay, be glad, for the dragon is dead, and I live. But wherefore have you scorned my counsel and come into peril? And where is Niniel? For her I would see, and surely you did not bring her from her home. Then Brandir told him that it was so, and Niniel was dead. But the wife of Dorlas cried out, Nay, lord, he is crazed, for he came here saying that you were dead, and he called it good tidings, but you live. Then Turambar was wrathful, and believed that all Brandir said or did was done in malice towards himself and Niniel, begrudging their love. And he spoke evilly to Brandir, calling him Clubfoot. Then Brandir reported all that he had heard, and named Niniel Nienor, daughter of Húrin. And he cried out upon Turambar with the last words of Glaurung, that he was a curse unto his kin and to all that harbored him. Then Turambar fell into a fury, for in those words he heard the feet of his doom overtaking him. And he charged Brandir with leading Niniel to her death, and publishing with delight the lies of Glaurung, if indeed he devised them not himself. Then he cursed Brandir and slew him, and he fled from the people into the woods. Mm-hmm. So once again, he kills somebody and then runs away.
Yeah. And there's no defending this kill.
No.
I mean, this is a pure cold blood murder.
Yeah. Yeah. This is just anger.
Mm-hmm.
It's even worse in the novel. I don't have that. I didn't prep anything on that, but I just recall that it got really nasty between the two of them. And Brandir too. I mean, Brandir was not an innocent player here. He, was trying to save the worst of it, but when Túrin started calling him Clubfoot, the gloves were off.
Yeah. That always is. This Clubfoot is interesting to me. There's a character that's not in the chapter in the Silmarillion, but that appears in the novel, The Children of Húrin. Mm-hmm. Do you remember Sador, Túrin's childhood friend?
Yeah, love that character.
He was. What was he? He was just sort of one of the hands around the house in Dor Morwen. He was a very old man, if I remember. He was an older guy, and I think he walked with a limp, right? And young Túrin gave him the nickname Labadal, which meant hop-a-foot.
Yeah. Which isn't exactly a compliment, but I guess from a kid you wouldn't take it as being. It was kind of a loving jest as a kid. Yeah. They were really good friends. They were very close. And in some ways, I think Sador was sort of almost a father figure to him, since his father wasn't around. I agree.
I don't know. This is one of those things. It's unfortunate that we don't see Sador Labadal in the chapter here, because we've seen so much of the sort of the cyclical nature of this story, how these little things keep coming up throughout Túrin's life. And here's another one. A nickname that he would have used for someone in love when he was a child, he's now using in hate and in anger.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before he kills someone.
And you're right about his anger. We get this in the novel version that, after he finds out, after Brandir tells him that Nienor was her name, not Niniel, in horror and fury his heart would not receive these words. As a beast hurt to death that will wound ere it dies all that are near it. So he was going to lash out. And Brandir just, basically tells him this, I was there. The dragon said this.
Yeah.
It's funny because Brandir's like, well, they say that men will speak true on their deathbed. Apparently a dragon does it too, because you are a curse unto your kin. And so what does Túrin say? Do men speak true before death? Then speak it now quickly.
Oh, wow.
Because, Brandir knows. And I have to say, there's a moment of bravery for Brandir. It says that
standing
Brandir,
up to Túrin.
He stands up to Túrin, and he knows full well he's about to die. Then Brandir, seeing his death in Túrin's face, stood still and did not quail, though he had no weapon but his crutch. And he said, all that has chanced is a long tale to tell, and I am weary of you. But you slander me, son of Húrin. Did Glaurung slander you? If you slay me, then all shall see that he did not. Yet I do not fear to die, for then I will go to seek Niniel, whom I loved, and perhaps I may find her again beyond the sea. And then, of course, Túrin basically says, you're not going to find her, you're going to find Glaurung. And then he hews him.
And then he kills him.
With Gurthang, Flat out cold-blooded murder. No question about it.
No question about it.
And then he runs. Obviously, that's different from Saros in the sense that the killing of Saros was an accident and was really triggered by Saros' own actions, at least initially, which is why he was held to be Nithan the Wronged. But it's his fleeing from the people into the woods. I mean, these people loved him. He was essentially the king. Nobody listened to Brandir anymore anyway. Oh, actually, that reminds me. Brandir wasn't his lord anymore. Remember, he renounced his lordship.
Yeah, I know,
about
but
that.
Still is the closest thing he had.
But yeah, you're right. He is. And I don't know if Dorlis wouldn't have known that anyway.
That's true. He may not have known. Yeah, that's true.
He and Hunthor and Túrin had left.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point, though.
Yeah. Anyway, just the fury, the anger, and again, one can hardly blame him. Hearing this must be like, you've got to be kidding me.
Sure, yeah. But it's interesting that in those words he heard the feet of his doom overtaking him.
Yes.
He calls them lies. He slays Brandir, because he's slandering him. But he knows deep down that there's some truth there.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, there's this almost a sense of justice. He thinks that Brandir's lying. And this is, we've talked about his overactive sense of justice that gets him into trouble. Yeah. And here it is doing it again. Justice is a good thing, but, when it isn't tempered by wisdom, and it's out of control, we got a problem.
Yeah, very well said.
So, well, now we get the consequences of his actions. So I'm going to have you pick up exactly where I left off.
Yep. But after a while, his madness left him, and he came to Houghton, and there sat, and pondered all his deeds. And he cried upon Finduilas to bring him counsel, for he knew not whether he would do now more ill to go to Doriath to seek his kin, or to forsake them forever and seek death in battle. And even as he sat there, Mablung, with a company of grey elves, came over the crossings of Teglin, and he knew Túrin, and hailed him, and was glad indeed to find him yet living, for he had learned of the coming forth of Glaurung, and that his path led to Brethil, and also he had heard report that the black sword of Nargothrond now dwelt there. Therefore he came to give warning to Túrin, and help if need be. But Túrin said, "You come too late. The dragon is dead." Then they marveled, and gave him great praise, but he cared nothing for it, and said, "This only I ask. Give me news of my kin, for in Dor-lómin I learned that they had gone to the hidden kingdom."
Well, there's something you wish you wouldn't have asked.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it would have been nice if you'd came before my wife got pregnant. I don't know. Just thinking. Before I got married? Yeah. Maybe? Maybe?
Well, if he had gone to Doriath or gone after Finduilas in the first place instead of hightailing it to Dor-lómin, so much of this wouldn't have happened.
Exactly. And he wouldn't have. And Mablung only came when he found out that the Black Sword was there, and that didn't happen until 3 years after the sack. So
that's true.
I can't blame Mablung for that. But it's, Mablung was spending those 3 years looking for Morwen and Nienor, right? Because it's the 3 years after the sack of Nargothrond.
That's right,
that the dragon comes out, and we know that Mablung had spent 3 years looking for them. So,
right.
Yeah, amazing. So Mablung finds him, asks him for news of his kin. We're not going to read the next couple paragraphs, but Mablung is like, man, I wish I didn't have to tell you this. Can you keep your sword, set it aside? I don't want, don't kill the messenger here. That Nienor is cast into the spell of dumb forgetfulness. And of course, Túrin recognized that and was like, that's it.
Of course.
I killed Brandir. I was wrong because he was telling the truth.
Yeah.
And then we get
words
Fae
of
again.
Glaurung were fulfilled in him.
Yeah. Laughed as one Fae. And he curses. He tells Mablung, "Go, return to Doriath, and a curse upon your errand." He runs away, and they chase him, but he gets to Cabed-en-Aras, and there he drew forth his sword, that now alone remained to him of all his possessions. And he said, "Hail, Gurthang! No lord or loyalty dost thou know, save the hand that wieldeth thee. From no blood wilt thou shrink. Wilt thou therefore take Túrin Turambar? Wilt thou slay me swiftly?" And from the blade rang a cold voice in answer, "Yea, I will drink thy blood gladly, that so I may forget the blood of Beleg my master, and the blood of Brandir slain unjustly. I will slay thee swiftly." Then Túrin set the hilts upon the ground, and cast himself upon the point of Gurthang, and the black blade took his life. But Mablung and the elves came and looked on the shape of Glaurung lying dead, and upon the body of Túrin, and they grieved. And when men of Brethil came thither, and they learned the reasons of Túrin's madness and death, they were aghast. And Mablung said bitterly, I also have been meshed in the doom of the children of Húrin, and thus with my tidings have slain one that I loved. Oh. Man.
Yeah.
Every time you wish this ended differently, and every time it doesn't.
I know. Yeah. Every time you feel like he's got one more chance to not do it, one more chance to make the right choice, and he doesn't. And at this point, I think it is partly a sense of justice. I think there's a lot more to it. I think he feels like he deserves punishment.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, he does. Yeah.
But
I mean, he's essentially asking the sword to execute him for a crime, for a murder.
Yeah. And asking for mercy. Wilt thou slay me swiftly? You know?
Yeah, make it easy.
Yeah. Wow.
Just, so painful.
Yeah.
You ache for Mablung, who just got here. And it's like, I didn't want to have to tell you this. And then, sure enough, he feels like he's killed him with his words.
Mm-hmm. With my tidings, I have slain one that I loved. It's he's such a hero. He takes responsibility for this situation that he has no responsibility for.
Yeah.
Wow.
And just like Gwyndor and Beleg, Mablung loves him.
Yeah.
We see that so deeply with the other two, and we see it here now with him.
Yeah.
Túrin was not somebody you felt, you didn't feel dispassionate about him. You didn't shrug your shoulders and go, Túrin, take him or leave him. You either loved him.
You love him or you hate him.
Or you were like Brandir and these others who didn't.
And the vast majority of people really seem to have loved him. I mean, people always wanted him to. People were always rooting for him.
The de facto king in both Nargothrond and Brethil.
Right. People loved him. People listened to him, and even when he made mistakes, those who knew about all the mistakes he had made, the Belegs and the Mablungs, they still loved him.
Absolutely, they do.
It's like you get the sense that everybody's rooting for him.
They are,
and he just can't do the right thing.
No, and I think we're gonna talk more about that aspect of what tragedy is.
Yeah,
and we'll also talk more about Gurthang. Don't worry, we're gonna get to that soon. But before we do, I want you to go ahead and finish up the chapter for us, so that then we can talk about Gurthang and then go on a little bit.
Okay, I'll do that. Then they lifted up Túrin, and found that Gurthang had broken asunder. But elves and men gathered there great store of wood, and they made a mighty burning, and the dragon was consumed to ashes. Túrin they laid in a high mound where he had fallen, and the shards of Gurthang were laid beside him. And when all was done, the elves sang a lament for the children of Húrin, and a great grey stone was set upon the mound, and thereon was carven in runes of Doriath, Túrin Turambar Dagnir Glaurung. And beneath they wrote also, Nienor Niniel. But she was not there, nor was it ever known whither the cold waters of Teglin had taken her.
Oh, goodness. We talked about
there again, the lament, the love that the elves have for them.
Absolutely.
Despite everything that's happened.
You want to hear that song, but
I know.
We also talked about Túrin being recognized for his heroic deed of killing the dragon, and sure enough, that is what his tombstone, in essence, says.
Yeah, Dagnir Glaurung.
Yeah, he's the slayer.
Slayer of Glaurung.
Yeah. That's what he's known for. Not all these other horrible things that he did.
Right.
But this one amazingly heroic thing. Yeah.
Yep. And we'll talk about that.
Oh, goodness. Well, let's go ahead and do that sidebar on Gurthang. I know we've talked about this for a while. We've been kind of excited about getting to this discussion because it's certainly intriguing, and it involves a lot of speculation, which is always fun.
Always fun.
I'll let you start off.
Yeah, well, it's not every day that we see a sword talk to its master. So
no, it's not.
And this, we did get a question about this. So this is one of the questions that I alluded to earlier. Tarek in Chicago wrote in, wanting us to address this question of the sentience of Gurthang. And he wrote in saying, that he remembered that Eol forged the sword, which at the time was called Anglihel, and its twin, Anguirel. And he forged both of these swords from ore that came from a meteorite. And Tarek acknowledged that, we're told in the book that Anglihel is imbued with the malevolence of its forger. I think those are Tarek's words. I've got
that's not
the actual words from the text. But he also wonders if the fact that
it's Smith, I think, is what.
Thank you.
Melian says,
yeah.
Still abides.
But he also wants to know if, what thoughts we have on whether the fact that it's a meteorite has anything to do with its sentience.
About that.
He has a really interesting speculative idea. He says he wonders if it might have. I'm going to paraphrase heavily, Tarek. I apologize, but just basically saying that maybe this meteorite has some cosmic origin with the Valar. Maybe that it might have been related to, related to Melkor's marring of Arda, either as an instrument of the marring, like maybe Melkor sent a lot of meteorites to mar Arda.
Well,
I guess is what I'm imagining there.
Sure, okay.
Yeah, or maybe it was an effect of Melkor's marring of Arda. He suggests that the theory that he's like, I know it's far fetched, but these are the things that I'm thinking about.
I know it's far fetched, but is Tom Bombadil J.R.R. Tolkien? No, just no. Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, no. But yeah, he says, I know this might be, but I know this is far fetched. But hey, what if it was even an Ainu spirit that was seduced by Melkor? Maybe one of these spirits of fire. And eventually became a
the
sentient
meteorite.
being.
I see what you mean.
Yeah, the meteorite
itself. Well, an interesting theory.
Became a sentient but inanimate being. Yeah, it's some neat speculation. I think he's got some cool ideas here. I mean, he admits they're far fetched, and there's nothing in the text to support it. But
no,
hey, we all have our little pet theories about.
It's kind of fun to think up stuff like that.
It is.
Yeah, I can't buy that a Maya would inhabit a rock. In the hopes that it might land in the place where somebody might then make a sword from the ore.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's certainly intriguing.
It's a neat, fun theory. I mean, I think to really get to the heart of what the sentience, the sentience that Gorthang has, I think.
Yeah, this apparent sentience. Yeah.
This apparent sentience. I know you've got your own thoughts on that.
Possibly.
I mean, really, the only thing that we see about it are the words of Melian, where she says. And you're right. There is malice in this sword. The dark heart of the smith still dwells in it. Yeah. If we're to take that literally, what I would gather is that any personality, let's say, I don't even want to use the word sentience, but any personality the sword might have would come from Eol. And maybe it's a case of a smith or a sub-creator somehow endowing his sub-creation with some bit of his own will. Okay. Now, obviously, Eol's no Sauron, so you're not going to get something like the One Ring.
He's not even an Aule. I mean,
No. He's an elf. He's nothing.
No.
But
I'm
so we're not going to see
making the dwarves, and they didn't.
Right, and endowing them with his own will. That's a good point. Yeah. So we're not going to see even a personality as strong as those, but maybe there is some support for the idea that that elves could impart some bit of their personality to something they've created. I don't think that the fact that it's a meteorite would have anything to do with it, only because there's the sentence that talks about it being from a meteorite is on page 201, and it says, "It was made of iron that fell from heaven as a blazing star. It would cleave all earth-delved iron." What I get from that is its hardness is a result of the fact that it was a meteorite. The fact that it can cleave terrestrial iron is because it was a meteorite. But I don't think that there's anything there to explain this sentience, if sentience it is.
It's not like there is malice in this sword. It was made of iron that fell from a
meteorite, yeah.
Then you would see that B explains A. Here we're seeing that A explains B, and B is just that it'll cleave earth-delved iron. I can't speak anymore.
Yeah.
No, I see what you mean. It's an interesting thought.
There's nothing. I mean, there's
nothing.
Really,
this is all that fun speculation we get to do every now and then.
Because even in History of Middle-earth, even in Hammond and Skull's Reader's Guide, I could not find any kind of explanation for this.
I couldn't either. And you touched on something about the idea that maybe somebody can leave a mark on something they make. I mean, we know that elves left the mark on certain swords. That the swords made in Gondolin in the First Age glowed blue whenever they were around orcs. That doesn't necessarily involve sentience or a will, but it certainly involves some sort of an enchantment, some sort of a magical ability.
That's true.
The ability to detect something and then respond. similar to what we saw with the Silmarils when they responded in brightness to Lúthien's song, on Morgoth's Morgoth's throne room. As for this, there are a few possibilities that came to my mind as we were talking about this. First is that, and I don't know that I go this route, but I can understand why it might be appealing, that this is simply the sort of literary license given to legends. This is where you have to remember things like the fact that the style of the Silmarillion and what it is in the Legendarium isn't the same as The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. It's not a strict narrative.
It's not a first-person account.
Exactly.
It's a myth.
It's a historical collection of myths and legends. And because of that, it is legendary work. And as such, this might be the sort of thing that would have been added to the story in the retelling, the oral history of the retelling of this legend. So that's one possibility. I don't know that I go there with that. I can't buy that as much. A second possibility, and this is interesting. I have to admit that this really
I guess the...
Go ahead.
Yeah, no. Well, no, I'm thinking about that first possibility. I think I'm with you. It's a possibility, sure. I think what scares me about going down that road is then you start to question so many things.
Exactly. That's the thing. I mean, when we get things like some say or it is said that, I want to believe those things.
Exactly.
Aule's creation of the dwarves, and it is said that they will then be set apart in different halls, and that they'll come back. I want to believe that that's the truth.
Or Ungoliant's fate. That's one I really.
Some say she
she ate herself. Yeah.
Really, really hungry one day and couldn't find a power bar, so she ate herself. I agree. I don't want to go there and dismiss this as being, just an embellishment, because it's not really written in that way.
Right.
I mean,
I
you
agree.
could make it that way, but I think you'd be stretching things. The second one is an interesting possibility. I'm still not sure I want to land on this one either, but there's the possibility that Túrin simply thinks that it speaks. He's distraught. He's suicidal. He wants to see his death as justice. Remember, he really has this strong sense of justice. And this choice of Gurthang would enable him to kill himself without being to blame for his own death. So it's sort of a figment of his
imagine
imagination.
The sword is sentient and you don't feel like it's a suicide. You feel like the sword is executing you.
It's executing you. It's doing justice. And therefore I'm not, committing this evil act. I don't know. I don't know. I can almost go there. But again, it's not written that way. It's not written as in Túrin heard this. It's just written as in from the blade rang a cold voice in answer. That seems like a narrative, not, if it had just said, and Túrin heard a cold voice in answer, yea, I will drink thy blood gladly, then I might be able to buy that a little bit more.
Yeah.
But the
fact that it just says the sword said it. Yeah.
Makes it sound like it's a pure narrative. So that brings us to that third possibility where I've kind of always been, which is that it really did speak. In which case, I think what you talked about, the malice of Eöl, clearly has something to do with it. Interestingly, though, in thinking this through, I was trying to think of other sentient objects besides the ring, because the ring really is an exception, because it literally has the spirit of Sauron in it, literally.
Right.
It made me think of what Bilbo found in the pocket of William the Troll.
His purse.
As Tolkien says, trolls' purses are the mischief, and this was no exception. Yeah, who are you? It squeaked as it left the pocket. Now, that opens up an entirely different can of worms, right? Was the purse sentient? Or was it more likely enchanted with a spell? Was it maybe nothing more sophisticated than like a car alarm keyed to the fingerprint of its owner?
So Bilbo touched it and set off the alarm.
Right, exactly. I mean, if that's the case, then it's vastly different from Gurthang.
Yeah. It's an interesting question.
It is.
One without an answer, unfortunately.
Yeah, with no answer. I mean, I do think you and I both land on the idea that it really does speak. It's not a legend, and it's not Túrin's own imagination, though those are two possibilities. It clearly speaks, so the question is, under what power? I've got to land that there is some ability for Eöl to embed his malice in it.
Yeah. Even if it wasn't intentional, even if it was if he was just he's just this person who's just racked with malice as he was.
It's just an effect of who he was, yeah.
Yeah.
I do think, though, that it's interesting and worth noting that even though it's been reforged, that Gurthang, well, first of all, responds to the name Gurthang, not Anglachel, but he says that I may forget the blood of Beleg, my master.
That's true.
He knows full well he doesn't belong to Túrin.
Yeah, that's true.
But interestingly, he knows he belongs to Beleg, not Thingol. So that means he was aware. I guess I'm giving the sword gender here,
right?
But pardon me, please. That's true. It
had a sense of its master, its rightful master being Beleg.
Exactly, which means it knew that it had originally been Thingol's, and that Thingol properly gave him to Beleg.
Mm-hmm.
And that
so its loyalty, if it was sentient, was to Beleg, not to Eöl. So any malice that it had was not malice because I'm doing Eöl's bidding now. It's just
full of malice.
It's just a malicious spirit. Yeah.
It's just a nasty.
I shouldn't say spirit, but it's a
enchantment or something.
A sense of malice.
Yeah, interesting. Now I know that probably means most of you think we're done, and you're like, "Ooh, it's about time since we're at 2 hours." We're not done.
No,
because
we're
we're going to actually finish the story. I know this is delving into the next chapter. We'll skip this when we get to the next chapter, and that's good because there's so much to talk about there that it's good that we're piling this in here. But I think we really want to learn of how this ends. So it actually is an epilogue, I think. Well, not all of it, though, now that I think about it. But most of this is...
A lot of it is an epilogue in the novel, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and read from the next chapter. It's a lengthy reading. I didn't want to break it down, but worth going through. So hang in there.
Can we give a page number before you start?
I don't have a hard copy in front of me. It's not very far in. It's
page 229.
Yeah. It's like the 11th or 12th paragraph. And
As darkness fell, right?
Darkness fell is where I'm going to start, and we're going to read that through to the break, where the shadow still followed him. So that'll give you a second to look it up, and then I'm going to go ahead and read this. As darkness fell, Húrin stumbled from the rock and fell into a heavy sleep of grief. But in his sleep he heard the voice of Morwen lamenting, and often she spoke his name. And it seemed to him that her voice came out of Brethil. Therefore, when he awoke with the coming of day, he arose and went back to the Brithiac, and passing along the eaves of Brethil, he came at a time of night to the crossings of Teglin. The night sentinels saw him, but they were filled with dread, for they thought that they saw a ghost out of some ancient battle mound that walked with darkness about it. And therefore Húrin was not stayed, and he came at last to the place of the burning of Glaurung, and saw the tall stone standing near the brink of Cabed Niedermarth. But Húrin did not look at the stone, for he knew what was written there, and his eyes had seen that he was not alone. Sitting in the shadow of the stone there was a woman, bent over her knees, and as Húrin stood there silent, she cast back her tattered hood and lifted her face. Gray she was, and old, but suddenly her eyes looked into his, and he knew her. For though they were wild and full of fear, that light still gleamed in them that long ago had earned for her the name Elithwen, proudest and most beautiful of mortal women in the days of old. "You come at last," she said. "I have waited too long." "It was a dark road. I've come as I could," he answered. "But you are too late," said Morwen. "They are lost." "I know it," he said, "but you are not." But Morwen said, "Almost. I am spent. I shall go with the sun. Now little time is left. If you know, tell me, how did she find him?" But Húrin did not answer, and they sat beside the stone and did not speak again. And when the sun went down, Morwen sighed and clasped his hand, and was still, and Húrin knew that she had died. He looked down at her in the twilight, and it seemed to him that the lines of grief and cruel hardship were smoothed away. "She was not conquered," he said, and he closed her eyes and sat unmoving beside her as the night drew down. The waters of Cabed Niedermarth roared on, but he heard no sound, and he saw nothing, and felt nothing, for his heart was stone within him. But there came a chill wind that drove sharp rain into his face, and he was roused, and anger rose in him like smoke, mastering reason, so that all his desire was to seek vengeance for his wrongs and for the wrongs of his kin, accusing in his anguish all those who ever had dealings with them. Then he rose up, and he made a grave for Morwen above Cabed Niedermarth on the west side of the stone, and upon it he cut these words, Here lies also Morwen Elithwen. It is told that a seer and harp player of Brethil named Glaurung made a song, saying that the stone of the hapless should not be defiled by Morgoth, nor ever thrown down, not though the sea should drown all the land, as after indeed befell. And still tall Morwen stands alone in the water beyond the new coasts that were made in the days of the wrath of the Valar. But Húrin does not lie there, for his doom drove him on, and the shadow still followed him.
Boy, what an epilogue that is.
Isn't it? It always brings me to tears.
More than
I think any other passage. Just that moment.
Rightly so. As a parent, to read this, it does something. It does really something to you if you're a parent.
You just can't help it.
To imagine, just to imagine that feeling anyway. To be old and know that your children have passed on before you, and for Morwen to have no idea how it happened, and for Húrin to know everything. Oh,
and everything in the most horrible way possible.
In the most because he saw with Morgoth's eyes. It is. It's a beautiful epilogue.
There's a beautiful. I love when he says that she was not conquered.
She was not conquered.
So
that is
key. It's so important.
Yeah.
But there's so much pain and sorrow, and you ache for Morwen, who for the last 3 years, where has she been?
Yeah.
And she was gray and old. Her eyes were wild and full of fear. She may have just been wandering the wild for these 3 years.
That's quite likely. Because no other tidings of her ever came. So she must have been.
No tidings came to Doriath, and she certainly didn't end up in Brethil.
Right.
There's no way she went down to Nargothrond.
No,
she wouldn't have survived. So, so sad, so heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But a beautiful prophecy. I love that. Well, I mean, except for the spoilers, but I mean,
that's all right. I think we've spoiled the fact that there are new coasts a few times already.
Yeah, the geography's going to change a little bit.
The geography's going to, your old map. You're going to have to get rid of your old maps.
Your old map, yeah. Well, you all know that already. That map of Beleriand.
You're going to have to get the new edition of the Thomas Guide.
Square A7. It's just gone. I don't know where it is. It's gone.
It's water now. I don't know.
The entire page is gone.
Oh man,
Thomas Guide. Well, nobody has a
Thomas
under
Guide anymore.
30 knows what a Thomas Guide is.
I had the pleasure of moving to Southern California in the year 2000, so I did still have a Thomas
Guide. Yep. Oh goodness, very helpful.
Oh yeah.
Oh, what a moment! And I would apologize for taking more time by going into that section, but I think it was really important that we read that. Partly because some of that really will inform our coming discussion on the power of the curse. Which we're going to dive into next. But just really powerful stuff. I didn't lead in with any explanation, but for those of you who don't know, by this point, obviously, Húrin had been released by Morgoth. He didn't escape. Morgoth realized, that he's going to be able to do more damage if I free him.
Right.
Then, I can accomplish even more. And we'll see that in the next chapter.
Sure, because the children are dead. Yeah. The torture is over, and now it's time for the next phase of sending Húrin out to let him, cause some damage out there.
Yeah. Well, the next chapter actually explains quite a bit of that. So We'll leave that for then so that we have some more stuff to talk about.
Yep.
The next chapter, the title gives it all away. The spoiler right there of the ruin of Doriath.
Of the ruin of Doriath. Yeah, that's
so we'll see.
Not going to end well.
No, it doesn't. Not, at least not for Doriath. But yeah, this is just such a beautiful but sorrowful moment.
And I think it's interesting, and maybe this is a way to segue us into the discussion of the curse. That Húrin, where is it? Húrin wants to seek vengeance for his wrongs and for the wrongs of his kin.
Yeah.
Húrin is proceeding from the assumption that his family has been wronged.
Yep.
And that gets back to this question of this curse. We keep talking about Túrin's mistakes, Morwen's mistakes, Nienor's mistakes. We sort of seem like we're throwing blame at the characters, and that we might not really think much about this curse, but there is something there, isn't there?
Oh, there absolutely is. There absolutely is, and I know you've got a few quotes that'll kind of pull that out, and we'll talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's just a few passages I just kind of pulled at random as I was kind of sort of skimming through this. Page 197, the narration says that Morgoth set a doom upon them, the family of Húrin, of darkness and sorrow. He set a doom upon them.
Right.
That speaks of an action.
Yes,
he did something to put this doom on them. Page 210, Gwyndor's words to Finduilas when he is revealing to her who Túrin truly is.
Mm-hmm.
He says, a doom indeed lies on him, but a dark doom.
Right.
And remember how wise Gwyndor was. Gwyndor so often knew the truth when others didn't. Gwyndor said it. Gwyndor was actually the first person to mention this curse.
Yes, he was.
And so that should tell us that
himself.
There's something.
Yeah.
Right.
When Túrin asked about his father. Yeah.
Right. Page 227. I think this is actually the beginning of the next chapter.
Oh yeah.
The chapter that you just started to read from. But as all this is going on, all that Morgoth knew of the working of his malice was revealed to Húrin.
Ooh.
Again, the working of his malice. Morgoth was doing something here.
Mm-hmm.
So that all, I think there is clearly a curse, and I think you found some references. I think was it in the novel version that there's even some more.
Exactly.
Very clear.
In Christopher Tolkien's introduction. I mean, there's no questioning that there is a curse. I mean, and that the curse is real. That the curse has some effect.
It's a thing that has power. It has some power.
Right. How much power, we'll get to that, but there's no question that it was there. Christopher Tolkien says that Túrin, quote, was condemned to live trapped in a malediction of huge and mysterious power, the curse of hatred set by Morgoth upon Húrin and Morwen and their children, because Húrin defied him and refused his will. Christopher goes on to discuss Morgoth's power, but also his fear, and this is cool. He points out that the curse of such a being who can claim that the shadow of my purpose lies upon Arda, and all that is in it bends slowly and surely to my will, is unlike the curses or imprecations of beings of far less power. This is so important right here. He says, Morgoth is not invoking evil or calamity on Húrin and his children. He's not calling on a higher power to be the agent, for he, master of the fates of Arda, as he named himself to Húrin, intends to bring about the ruin of his enemy by the force of his own gigantic will. So, that the power of Morgoth is really mentioned there. But he even points out, and I thought this was interesting, I'd never read this before until I read the introduction, that Tolkien himself considered an alternative title to this story. We talked about the Narn I Chin Húrin, or Chin. I can only do that once or twice. But because the curse is so important, he almost called it the Narn Irach Morgoth, the tale of the curse of Morgoth.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So that
he wouldn't have called it that if there was no curse.
Yeah. If the curse was just a, some voodoo hex.
Some idle thing. I mean, we see idle curses sometimes in the Silmarillion. I didn't think to mark any, but there are times when a mortal character or an incarnate character, an elf or a man, sort of.
Well, Túrin just cursed Mablung's errand.
Oh, that's true.
Doriath,
that's a good point.
There's
that's
powerless
a good point.
curse.
He has
no ability to bring anything about.
And Feanor's cast curses on people, and these are creatures that do not have any.
Yeah, no power.
They would be
true.
Calling upon a power.
Right.
To do this for them. Morgoth doesn't have to do that. He is he is the being of power.
Yeah.
And as much as we've talked about Morgoth losing his power as he spends it, he puts it into Arda. I mean, we've talked about that before.
Into the world itself.
Yeah, and we talked about that's why that one volume of the history of Middle Earth that we keep going to is called Morgoth's Ring, because Arda was Morgoth's ring. He put so much of his own will into it to subject it to his will. Tolkien goes so far as to say that all matter in Arda had a Melkor ingredient in it. And so it's certainly conceivable that Morgoth had the power with so much mastery over literally the matter of Earth, that he would have had the power to sort of put this doom on Turin in the sense that he's stacking the deck, stacking the deck against Turin. He's got all this power at his disposal, and he's going to use it to really stack the deck against Turin, to really kind of lead Turin into making poor choices.
Right.
And we talked about how Glaurung is the chief instrument, and Morwen and Nienor and all the others, and Brandir and Dorlas.
Well.
But it's interesting the ripple effects that this has,
it is.
To make everybody around him sort of start making bad choices. And we talked about how Glaurung is such an important instrument of that, Glaurung's lies. If I were targeted by a being like Morgoth, who had that kind of power to make my life miserable, it would feel like fate was against you, wouldn't it? I mean,
yeah, of course it would.
One can see how Turin felt this way.
Everything you do, crumbles to dust. Everything you do falls apart.
Yeah.
You'd feel like you're cursed, like literally.
You would feel like you're cursed. You would feel like it was inescapable curse. But I don't think it is. And I think that carrying, I talked about him stacking the deck. If I want to carry that card-playing metaphor forward, Morgoth stacked the deck and Turin was dealt a bad hand. But at the same time, a bad hand it's just that. It's a bad hand. How you choose to play it is up to you.
Yeah.
And I think that's what gets us back to this question of culpability, which, you and I both definitely have seen Turin as responsible for his own choices, and definitely
I think
believe that he's responsible.
Tolkien makes it clear that that's the perspective here, I think.
He does. I think he does. And I think we'll talk a little bit about some of Tolkien's sources and some of Tolkien's inspirations that would have led to this.
You think we're close to done, folks? We're still not.
No, we're not.
This is a long one.
But and I guess for anybody who's wondering why we're going all into this, I mean, there's a lot of talk out there about how much did this curse, how much power did this curse have? I think readers tend to fall down on one of two sides. Either they think that Turin is responsible for everything, or that Turin is not responsible for anything, that it's this curse that's driving him. And clearly it is not the second one. I think this curse is a factor, but it's not the only factor. And I think he had power, he had power to change his fate that he didn't really exercise.
I agree. There's a quote, I think you mentioned it earlier when we were talking about this, but I know I also included it in the essay that is going to come out next week in the Prancing Pony Pondering. There's a quote from the novel version that Morgoth began to fear that Turin would grow to such a power that the curse that he laid upon him would become void, and that he would escape the doom that had been designed for him, or else that he might retreat to Doriath and be lost to his sight again.
Right.
That tells us so much. Well, first of all, it tells us about Morgoth's fear, which Christopher Tolkien mentioned, but this quote is directly related to that. Morgoth literally fears Turin growing in power,
so that the curse is void.
Yeah. And that he could escape.
That he would escape it. That had been designed for him.
Yeah, exactly. Or that he might be lost, that he wouldn't be able to see him anymore and work his curse upon him.
Right.
So that tells us that.
So it seems like it was far from inescapable. There are any number of things that could have happened.
He either gets powerful enough, or he escapes the doom,
or he just manages to hide. Yeah.
And hiding is sometimes a good option.
Sometimes, yeah.
Christopher Tolkien also in the introduction hints at this when he says this: the curse of Morgoth seems to be seen, as it's talking about in the book, in the text itself, the curse seems to be seen as power unleashed to work evil, seeking out its victims. So the fallen Vala himself is said to fear that Turin would grow to that power. That's big because it's not an inescapable thing. It is
right.
a power that seeks out its victims, but if it can't find them, it can't accomplish the goal. That's why Doriath is so important. And that's a big reminder because it tells us that the very first things that happened that triggered this in the first place, the fight with Cyrus, Doriath, the death of Cyrus, and the decision to leave and to flee judgment, all of those things took place, and they didn't have to because at that point he was lost to the sight of Morgoth. At that point, the curse is inoperable. So
that's a good point.
That's a very good point.
That was all Túrin. There was no curse at work at that point. That was all Túrin and his bad choice.
100% Túrin right there.
And Túrin and his pride. And I know we want to talk about pride as sort of this this driver of his choices. But the thing that amazes me about all of this is it's sad, but it's also just kind of amusing how much Túrin spends his entire life trying to change his own fate.
Yeah.
Even going so far as to adopt the name Turambar, Master of Doom, without realizing that as a man, he had the power. Let me get my Wizard of Oz, the Good Witch voice. You had the power all along to go home. You had the power all along to change your fate.
Yeah, you did. You're right. That's
because we know, and we talked about this chapters and chapters ago, we know that men have a degree of free will, of virtue to shape their life amid the powers and chances of the world, beyond the music of the Ainur, which is as fate to all things else. And that goes back to chapter 1 or chapter 2. I think it's chapter 1.
Very early on.
So
I think you're right, chapter 1. It's not the Ainulindale, but it's chapter 1.
Right. Yeah. So he had the power. He didn't have to flee. He didn't have to become something he wasn't in order to control his fate.
Right.
All he had to do was
change his actions,
start making some better decisions,
shape his life. He has the virtue, the power to do that.
Yep.
Even though, unlike the rest of ordinary men, he's being opposed. That's the thing to realize is his will is being opposed actively, but not in a way that couldn't be overcome or avoided. More likely avoided. Overcome, probably not so much. And we see that in all the constant things that he does. You talked about the name changes, which are awesome. But if we look at all the other things that he's done, every single one of them seems to stem from this problem of pride. We've talked about his sins of pride. Everything from let's just kind of run through a laundry list. We've got hurling the vessel at Cyrus and then chasing him to his death, and then fleeing judgment, joining the outlaws and acting evilly. We know that they slew people that were good people. Yeah. Refusing the pardon of Thingol when Beleg brought it to him.
Boy, that one's just he couldn't swallow his pride and take pardon.
Seriously, you can't go back. I mean, if you right there go back to Doriath, this is over.
This story is over. Yeah.
And then your mother and sister can come, and you can say hi to your sister instead of marrying her, which would really be good. Anyway, this one's not so much a sin per se, but it's certainly an act of pride that cost him putting on the helm again and revealing himself to Morgoth. Totally unnecessary. As you said,
he
didn't need
better to lie hidden at times. Yeah.
The slaying of Beleg, I don't know. This was not intentional. It was impulsive, but I don't want to hold that against him so much. I mean, that was clearly, just an act that.
That's a tough one. That does seem kind of like a bad luck thing.
It really does. I mean, that seems, more fate and less pride. In fact, that's definitely not a pride thing. It's just impulsiveness, maybe.
True.
But it's only at that point that he finds out about the curse. So after that, everything is post having, now he knows there's a curse on him.
And it's interesting to note that the trajectory of his life doesn't really change when he finds out about the curse.
It's already headed that direction.
Right. Yes. It's not like he learns, there's this curse, I better start really making the right choices.
Right.
Or
you'd think he would start turning it around.
Right. And nor does he go the opposite direction to say, there's this curse on me, so, I guess.
Shrug my shoulders. I might as well start having fun.
Right.
After that, the pride just jumps out. His rise to power in Nargothrond, the way he treats Gwyndor, his decision to fight without stealth and build a bridge, and then his decision to ignore the message from Ulmo to destroy that said bridge.
Yeah. Well, in regards to that one, we didn't talk about this one. There's a bit of Ophir mode in the Children of Húrin that happens in that scene. Do you remember that line where Túrin says something like, "There is but one Vala with whom we have to do, and that is Morgoth"?
Yes.
That's his response to the.
That's very Feanor-like, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I mean, that's getting into blasphemy.
It really is.
Equating Morgoth with the Valar and saying that Olmo's warning is worthless.
Yeah, I don't need to listen to that. I got nothing to do with him. I only have to deal with Morgoth.
I only have to deal with Morgoth.
Really? Because Manway's king of the whole planet. I mean, I know he's kind of not doing much lately, but yeah. His
pride, just complete pride,
just comes screaming out. Not doing what Gwyndor says about Finduilas, though. Again, that's like the slaying of Beleg. I can't hold that fully against him because he was under that spell of paralysis from the dragon. But once he was free to move again, he chose the wrong thing.
Yeah. And that had so much to do with the things that happened later. Because if he had just gone, and
rescued her,
saved Finduilas, so many things could have happened.
Well, then he probably wouldn't have married his sister because he would have been married to Finduilas.
He could have married Finduilas. He could have gone back to Nargothrond and dispatched Glaurung. Anything could have happened to change what happened with Morwen and Nienor later on.
Yeah.
Not to mention poor Finduilas.
Oh, I know, poor Finduilas. Oh, that's gotta hurt. That was just not the way to go.
She hung around all day waiting for him.
All day long. How many bad things are we going to say about being,
I know.
Yeah, she put a sticky note on the board with a thumbtack.
Oh man.
The chaos that he causes in Dorloman, the slaying of Brada and kind of how he just uproots their whole lives and then leaves. Leaving everybody else to face the consequences of his wrath and of his pride. I mean, I say that saying this, even if the spell of Glaurung is irresistible, and I have to say, to some extent, it appears that it might be, given the way Nienor, succumbed.
Yeah, that's true.
Túrin still, in terms of okay, maybe he couldn't have helped himself in terms of not going after Finduilas. Maybe. You could make that argument. I'm not so sure, but let's assume that you could. Even if that's true, Túrin still slew Brada after his eyes were opened and the last threads of the spell were loose. So again, we're back into full Túrin here.
Right.
And then, of course, in Brethil, his eventual usurpation of Brandir's authority.
Replay of his greatest hits from Nargothrond.
Exactly, Nargothrond Part 2. His gloating over over Glaurung.
Over Glaurung, yeah.
That might have been the dumbest thing he'd ever done.
Yeah.
The cursing and slaying of Brandir, totally unjustly. And then, depending on how you look at his suicide. I mean, it's different from the willing surrender of life. We talked about this with Hope and Despair, and we talked about Aragorn, or even Theoden, who's going and is willing to die, but isn't actively seeking his death.
Right.
And then Denethor, who, on the other hand, lights himself on fire. That's going to leave a mark. Here we get a guy who's actively committing suicide, and that's you got to remember. This is where it sometimes helps to remember Tolkien's own personal worldview. In Christian doctrine, especially in Catholic doctrine, suicide's a grievous sin of pride. You're saying that I have the right to do with with my body, which God made. I can destroy it. I have that right. Well,
right.
In Tolkien's world, that's not the case at all. You don't have the right to take your own life. It's not yours to take.
Gandalf says exactly that to Denethor in the book.
Right. It is not for you to decide. Yeah, absolutely. And that's a very good point. I'd forgotten about that. But that's a good reminder. So that's just kind of a laundry list of some of those things.
Pride again and again, and I think it is very clear that these are his own actions, and yet despite all of that, there's this was one place I really thought we were going to have a little bit of a disagreement and give the listeners some entertainment here, because people keep telling us that we need to disagree more.
I know.
I don't know what that's about. We click on too much.
We must just be too convincing.
Yeah, that's it.
Or we're like Orodreth. We just kind of go with whoever.
We just whatever. Yeah, it sounds good for now. But I kind of thought we might have some fireworks at this part, but we were talking about it. And I think we're kind of on the same page here. That that there is a distinction between Túrin's sins of pride and some of the other sins of pride. I'm thinking of somebody like a Feanor. Let's pull out the Feanor pinata again.
Boom. There ain't no more candy in that one.
No, just ashes coming out of it now. Like I said, people tend to either a lot of readers. I'm not saying everyone, but I see a lot of Túrin is completely innocent because of the curse, or Túrin is completely guilty and he's the most reprehensible human being that ever lived. I have heard him. I've heard him called the human Feanor. But I don't think that he is, because I think that for all of this, I think there is something pitiable about him, and he he makes the wrong choices again and again and again. Yeah. But you do still pity him. You can understand how people like Mablung and Beleg and Gwyndor would just do anything for him.
Absolutely.
And it's fascinating. I mean, I think Tolkien does this very intentionally, and we'll talk some about that.
Sure.
But it's an interesting thing, and I just want to say, we're beating up on Túrin a little bit. We're listing out all of his sins of pride, laundry list, as you said. But again, there is something that we want to root for him right up until the end, like you said, right up until the end. We want the story to end differently.
We really do. And that's why, we don't disagree as much as we might have. I'm sorry, listeners. I know you're right. We need to. Maybe one of you can convince him between now and summer when we discuss the films. Maybe one of you can convince him of how great The Hobbit was. And then that way we can disagree.
And then we can disagree about that.
That'd be
fun. Why do I have to be the one who has to take the pro?
Why do you have to be the one who's going to be wrong?
Yeah, right. Yeah, right.
Oh, sorry.
I don't want to argue that losing position.
No, I know. But you know what? Were you ever in debate team or anything like that, where you had to argue the opposite side?
No, I wasn't.
That was always fun.
I wish I had been.
That was always a challenge.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that. It was hard. But anyway, I digress. It took us 3 hours
to finally digress.
2.5 hours to digress, I should say.
Yeah.
Anyway, we agree, I think, that he's not as responsible as, for example, Feanor is for his own actions. I think we would say, to borrow a legal term, that there are mitigating circumstances in Túrin's story that are just totally absent from Feanor's story. Feanor's, it's the other way around. There's aggravating circumstances. There's the fact that you had absolutely no need to kill the Teleri. You had no need to burn their ships.
Right.
Those are aggravating circumstances, not mitigating. Yeah, go ahead. I'm so sorry.
No, I was going to say, but by the end of Feanor's story, I am glad he's dead. I'm glad that
Middle-earth is relieved
influence
of this. Yeah,
Middle-earth is relieved of that bad influence. Yeah,
absolutely. Whereas in this case, you're just like, oh man, I'd hoped for once he'd make the right call.
Yeah.
But in fairness to Túrin, and talk about those mitigating circumstances, when the darkest evil and the most powerful individual entity in all of Arda says that his thought shall weigh as a cloud of doom upon all whom Húrin loves.
Yeah.
That makes the idea of doing the right thing or making that right decision just a touch harder.
It makes it hard, yeah.
But I agree. We should disagree more. It would have been a lot more fun in the Feanor story had you been like those passionate fanboys who justify the kinslaying because, they should have helped.
But then
they should have. Come on, they should have helped.
If I was on that page with Feanor, I don't think this podcast would have ever started.
I probably wouldn't have. I probably
wouldn't.
Yeah, I would have tried a solo one. It would have gone 2 episodes. I would have said I'm done.
That would have been irreconcilable differences.
No doubt about that.
But, on this topic...
we will try to disagree more, I promise.
We will try to disagree more. I mentioned earlier that we had a question from Maya in Michigan.
Who's gone 2.5 hours going, I thought you were going to get to my question.
I thought you guys could talk about me. Yeah. But she kind of wrote into us on Facebook a little while ago saying, why is Túrin called an elf friend when they speak of him at the Council of Elrond in Fellowship? He's mentioned alongside Hador and Húrin and Beren. And Maya even said, what does he do? What does he do to be compared to them? I'm based on, what I know of the story, what does he do? I can't think of anything that kind of makes him worthy of that. And I think that's a common that's sort of a common reaction to the character because his misdeeds are so bad.
Well, and when compared to Beren or Húrin, it's like, what?
Well, certainly, yeah. None of those guys really even had any significant misdeeds.
No.
There's a couple of answers as to why he's called an elf friend. I mean, partly it's just because the Edain are all considered elf friends.
Right.
But I mean, again, he did kill a dragon.
Mm-hmm.
That was no small feat. And
considering
I think
the next person we know who slays a dragon is definitely considered a hero.
that's true. Yeah. So, yeah, there's this sort of there's this attitude towards him within the legendarium itself that he is remembered somewhat fondly despite all of his misdeeds.
Absolutely.
You compare that with Feanor, who Tolkien himself called evil, called his oath blasphemous. You compare that with somebody like an Ar-Pharazôn, and what happens to
I hadn't even thought.
poor Numenor under his leadership. So I don't know. I just think it's. I think there is something to this. I think it was very intentional on Tolkien's part to make him a more pitiable character.
Oh, certainly.
And I think that's because he was really going for a tragedy here with this story.
Yes,
and
that's key.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. In fact, I think we'll talk about that in a little bit. Before we do, I want to talk about, a little discussion that I mentioned we would talk about before we got to the end of this chapter, and that was about Boethius. I think I remember saying when we first started this chapter, yeah, I'm going to talk about Boethius. Yeah, sure. I mean, they're 2.5 hours in, but sure, we'll start talking about him. Boethius. We'll get
to it in this episode. We'll promise.
Get to it, no matter how long it is. Boethius of the House of Beor. No, just kidding. Kind of sounds like he belongs for that, but
he does.
He was
that's great.
He was a 6th century philosopher, and he wrote a famous work called Constellation of Philosophy. Now, some of this is going to appear in a much more expanded format in the essay that will hit the Prancing Pony Ponderings next week, so just be aware of that. So try not to steal my own thunder here, but I think it's important for listeners to tie it in. Boethius in this work tried to reconcile this concept of free will. We've been talking about the curse and does Túrin have free will? Free will with this idea of a world sovereignly operated by God. We've talked about fate and free will and all of that. Some of Boethius' solutions to this sticky wicket we see him throughout Tolkien's Legendarium, little snippets here and there. And this is as good a place to bring him up because in Túrin's story, more than in any other story, we see this confluence of providence and fate and chance and free will. So even though I'm going to go into more depth on it next week, I wanted to start here. First, just so we know this, Boethius' work was translated into several languages, including Old English. It was
okay.
Yeah, it's been around obviously since the 6th century, so it wasn't Old English then. For a long time, people believed that translation was actually written by King Alfred the Great, but I was reading recently that modern scholars are no longer convinced. So
interesting.
Maybe not. It might have been one of his. It might have been ordered by him to be translated.
Yeah, somebody who was part of his court or something. Yeah,
exactly. But it is a very it's an Old English translation that dates back to that time frame. And of course, Tolkien was the scholar of Old English, so he might
have actually read it. He might have known it, huh?
Well, in fact, it turns out that he did. Excerpts from that translation were actually included in the text for his final English exams. So he definitely, if he did his homework, he was familiar with it. And Tom Shippey, Tolkien biographer who wrote Author of the Century and Road to Middle-earth, he says that Tolkien knew this translation well. So it's not surprising that Tolkien kind of had this Boethian view of providence, fate, and free will kind of sneak into his Legendarium. So I need to explain what that means, though, what a Boethian view is. Time, in this concept, in this idea, time is itself a created thing. So God, or in the Middle-earth Legendarium, Eru, exists outside of time. And we get that, right? We get the timeless halls.
The timeless halls, right?
And that's really key, because that tells us he's someplace outside of time. Now, this was Boethius' way of avoiding those kind of deterministic arguments. The idea that, well, you don't have free will because God previously determined you would listen to this podcast today. So since that was determined in the past, you are not free to choose.
You couldn't control it. Yeah, you couldn't control it. God already knew it was going to happen. So all of your actions.
So it's already ordained. Thus, there's no free will.
Right.
But Boethius got away from that by saying, well, God exists outside of time. So there's no past, present, or future. All is present. So that's a simplistic, and please forgive me for that, but I don't want to spend 45 minutes on a philosophy lecture.
Sure.
But that is the simple nutshell version of it, and it avoids that deterministic argument, but it doesn't address that interplay between fate and free will. So I'm going to get to that next. As always, somebody else said it better than me. So I'm not going to read this whole thing. I'm just going to summarize, but the quote I provide in next week's essay. The source is an article on Boethian philosophy and Tolkien's work, and part of that article is recreated in Hammond and Skull's Reader's Guide, so you can find it in Hammond and Skull's Guide. But the summary is real straightforward, so I'm just going to leave it right here. We'll lay it out. We're almost done with this. There's providence, which is the divine reason that orders the universe. This would be Eru's plan. Okay, that's providence. Eru's the divine reason that orders everything. Fate is... You go ahead.
And we know that there's a plan. I mean, we see references to the divine plan, even things like the ennoblement of men through the blood of elves. Yeah.
So it's a given that there's this.
Yep.
Fate, because oftentimes we kind of see that and fate as being the same, but it's really important because providence starts there. It starts in that timeless place. Fate is the manifestation of that order within our linear time frame, right? So as we go from moment A to moment B to moment C, and we can't go back to moment A because time goes in one direction and at one speed. Fate is the unfolding of that reason or of that order, that plan within our time frame. So,
so
that's the difference.
So it's taking it from a timeless view of everything at once, knowing everything at once.
Exactly.
To a playing out.
Playing out.
All this stuff in time.
Yeah, as it gets unfolded in time. Now, chance is different from fate. Chance is, well, it's not different then. It's a subset. Chance is fate that occurs unexpectedly and for reasons that we, in our timeline, cannot know or explain. Things that might appear random but are actually fate, like the biggest thing I can think of in the Legendarium, Bilbo finding the ring.
Right.
Bilbo finding the ring looks like chance. It's really fate. It's things that appear random but are clearly the finger of Iluvatar, the hand of God working in the story. And free will, which is separate from all of those, that's the ability of individuals to exercise control over their conduct, what they think, how they act, what they say, what they do, or what they don't say, that kind of thing. I'm going to kind of draw it to an end there because I think that's enough to start with. Applying this to Túrin could take another hour, so just read my essay next week. But I will give you a hint about the conclusion. We've already talked about this. This wasn't an inescapable doom. It was an immense evil, difficult but not impossible to resist, and the foolishness and pride of Túrin, and even Morwen, really. So there you have it. There's Boethius and how that fits with fate and free will.
Well, having read that essay, which is brilliant, by the way, I will say to everyone listening that, yes, you should go out and read that essay as soon as it's up there. Really fascinating. So basically all this boils down to there's providence, there's fate, there's chance, but there is also free will.
Exactly. There's providence to start. We see it played out as fate. We as the reader, because we get to see that omniscient narrator view. But if we were living in the timeline, we'd see it as chance. But that's why we always have Gandalf saying, if chance if chance there be. That's why when you hear that, you're talking about chance, the recognition that chance is fate. But then free will, which is the ability of people or, dwarves, elves, hobbits. And I go into length at that in the essay too. So read that next week about proving that there is free will, in terms of moral culpability. But we'll get to that. So that's what it boils down to.
That's great. I mean,
Sorry, it's a little dense.
No, it is, but it's fascinating stuff. And I mean, of course, Tolkien as a medievalist would have known Boethius. I mean, I know a little bit of Boethius just from my undergrad, doing a little bit of medieval literature in undergrad. I don't know it as deeply as what you just kind of laid out, but I'm aware of some of the stuff that he said.
Sure.
When I was looking for some sort of proof, some sort of evidence that Tolkien would be adopting this, would be going with this free will concept with Túrin, I actually went to another ancient philosopher.
Oh, wow. This is going to be fun.
I'm going to start with a Princess Bride reference. Have you ever heard of Plato, Aristotle, Socrates?
Morons.
Morons. So Aristotle is the one I'm going to go with here, who I believe was also an influence on Boethius, by the way, but I could not possibly articulate how he was. But Aristotle wrote the book on Greek tragedy, the Poetics. And I've been saying all along that, this is like a Greek tragedy. I've done that for a reason. Yeah. And, throughout the Poetics, Aristotle's favorite example of tragedy that he keeps on referring to is Oedipus, the character of Oedipus in Oedipus Rex. Now, I'm sure a lot of people
fate really plays a hand, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Because I think, if you're not familiar with the story, you might just know, Oedipus killed his father and married his mother. That's probably what everybody knows about Oedipus.
Yeah.
But if you read the tragedy by Sophocles, Oedipus Rex, you see that he was told by an oracle that he was going to kill his father and marry his mother. And he acted on that, trying to escape that fate, just like Turin does.
To escape that fate is what actually got him into that mess.
Right, because he didn't know he was adopted. Right. That's basically what it boiled down to.
So are you telling me I need to make sure I tell my son that he's adopted?
Probably at some point, yeah.
He's black, I'm white. I might not have to tell him.
he might figure it out.
He might already know.
He might figure it out. So yeah, he ended up, thinking that his father and mother were the people who raised him.
Yeah.
He leaves home and he ends up doing exactly the thing that he was trying to avoid.
Terrible story.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And it's very close to Turin's story, not just for the incest thing, but obviously because of this character having the pride to think that he can conquer his own fate and tragically failing. Tolkien himself actually compares Turin with Oedipus in Our Favorite Letter, 131.
Oh, yeah, you're right. He does. I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah, he's talking about Turin. It's actually the only reference to Turin in his letters. But he mentions, Turin has a little bit of Sigurd and the Finnish Kullervo and the Greek Oedipus. And he even calls it the tragic tale of Túrin Turambar and his sister Nienor, of which Turin is the hero.
Oh,
so
cool.
I think it... Yeah,
so I think he certainly never refers to Fëanor as a hero. That's what
this
I think.
Is true.
We talked about that earlier. The difference between
evil and blasphemous and things like that.
Right.
And I think calling it a tragic tale of which Turin is the hero, I think it's pretty clear.
That's key.
That Turin is intended as a bona fide Greek tragic hero.
And
I think certainly the influence is there. The story fits the pattern of a Greek tragedy. You look at something like Oedipus, it's this downward spiral of a man who starts out with everything and ends up with nothing. Reversal of fortune is a word that we often use. I actually might do an essay on this too, on the principle and boundaries, because there are a lot of different specific elements.
Here to dive into.
Yeah, there's a lot of specific stuff. Different stages of a tragedy narrative that really happen here in Turin. But one of the things that you always get is the catastrophe at the end.
Right.
And the original meaning of catastrophe was, an unhappy ending of a tragedy. And that's exactly why Tolkien came up with eucatastrophe as a happy ending, but that's another story. But the purpose of the catastrophe is always to invoke pity and fear in the audience. And that's why I keep on saying that Turin is pitiable.
Not judgment or condemnation.
Exactly.
That's why it's easier for us to find that soft spot in our hearts
to condemn yeah, exactly. We can condemn Fëanor. We can condemn Ar-Pharazôn, but it is harder to condemn Turin, I think.
Yep.
But where I'm going with this, because I said I wanted to talk about this in reference to free will, the tragic hero always has a tragic flaw.
Yes.
And it's what's interesting about this is that we always call it a tragic flaw in English, but the Greek word hamartia actually means fault or error.
I know that word, and I don't know much Greek. I wonder if that's got a relation to sin, biblically speaking.
I believe it does.
Error.
Yeah, I believe it. Hamartia. It might be the word used for sin in the New Testament.
Yeah, I'll have to look that up. Yeah. That's fascinating because I'm pretty sure my pastor's used that word before.
Yeah, and all of those, fault, error, sin, those all imply a degree of culpability that flaw doesn't imply. So I think, going back to the Greek word, there is an implication that the tragic hero is responsible for their own actions. The story wouldn't inspire pity and fear if they weren't. If they were just bad luck, ill fate, it just wouldn't inspire the same kind of fear. But to see a person make bad choices and see their life just completely spiral out of control, I think that does inspire pity and fear. Yeah. And so I think that it is necessary for the hero to have free will for this pity and fear to occur. So, yeah, I don't know. That's kind of my Aristotle, the way I've approached this from Aristotle. I think if Túrin was not responsible for his own actions, it just wouldn't be a tragic story. I don't think that Tolkien would do that. You know, and it's compelling because he makes bad choices, because he's someone we can relate to. Someone, you know, we could be that guy. He's not horrible like a Feanor. He's not shining example like a Tuor. He's just you know, he's just a guy.
And we could guy, you know.
He's just man. Let's get one more reference in there.
Oh, you know,
yeah,
we always will.
Exactly. So, you know, that's, as you said, you know, we do feel pity for Túrin as opposed to the kind of contempt or condemnation that we might feel for somebody like the Feanor.
Well, now that we've kind of dragged Túrin over the coals, but also said, "Oh, poor Túrin," we should probably talk a little bit about the curse. Now that we understand that it's not completely impossible to defeat, as it relates to Morwen and Nienor. It you know, real briefly, because obviously we've been going at this for closing in on 3 hours
now. 3 hours, yeah.
You know,
thank you all, by the way, for listening.
Yeah, seriously, if you still are. We don't get we get reports on how many people download it. We don't get reports on how long you actually listen. Morwen could and obviously should have chosen differently on at least 2 different occasions that I look at. I see during those first 9 years in Doriath, when the first 9 years of Túrin's life in Doriath, when Thingol kept sending messengers saying, "Come, live here," and she kept saying, "No, I'm going to stay here in our homestead." And then later, after she did eventually come, and Túrin wasn't there, when she refused the counsel of Melian, and also even the counsel of her own daughter. Pride, yeah. Hubris, overconfidence. You know, this. Well, I can endure this.
Which is that classic tragic flaw, isn't it? Hubris or overmode. Yeah.
Overmode. Yeah. But like we said before, Nienor seems like the truest victim. I mean, she did make a couple of errors. She followed her mom and didn't return, even though her mom told her to go back. But none of her actions seem to be rooted out of pride so much as maybe, well, a little bit of naivete. I think I talked about that. Even her actions with the dragon, you know, speak to somebody who has some pride, maybe, you know, that whole idea of, well, the children of Houghton, we're not liars. You know,
maybe a little rashness.
We're not craven. I mean, yeah, rashness. That's a good word.
Which is one of Túrin's flaws too, I suppose.
Yeah, it is. I mean, she's definitely a child of Hourin. But she just, compared to the other two.
Yeah. Well, I think that's why we both kind of land on she's kind of the closest thing to a victim of this curse. You know, the closest to the closest to an innocent.
Yeah, she really is, and that's what makes her death so sad. Her ending is just deeply tragic in that Greek sense.
I mean, she makes some mistakes, but you know, they're not mistakes that I would normally consider tragic flaws. You know, listening to her mother, kind of rushing out, you know, without thinking. You know,
especially when her goal in rushing out was to get her mother to come back.
Yeah, right.
You know,
true.
We get that a little extra from the novel version.
Right, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like she's trying to do the right thing desperately in all situations.
I think in any other family she might have been okay, but it's just she ends up in this family and kind of
bad luck for her.
It all.
That's
Yeah.
You can pick your friends, but you can't pick your family.
Yeah. Whereas Túrin, I think, is the one that just, you know, Túrin seems to me so much like Morwen. You know,
doesn't he?
It's much the same kind of flaws.
Deeply
writ
stubborn,
large,
deeply prideful. Boy, yeah, writ large indeed. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. My goodness.
Well, I don't know. I mean, kind of. Have we beat this thing to death yet?
I think we have. I mean, I guess the only thing is why? Why would Tolkien sort of... He loves the eucatastrophe. He talks about how crucial that is to a fairy tale, and yet he sticks this deeply tragic tale in the middle of his mythology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Why does he go for the catastrophe here and not the eucatastrophe? Right. Yeah, and you know, the thing that strikes me about this is, you know, we've both read Verlyn Flieger's Splintered Light. Fantastic book.
Yes, highly recommended.
Highly recommended. it really just sheds light, pun absolutely intended, on Tolkien's world. She actually has some things to say about some of these themes, and I'm actually going to quote from her here. She says in her book, "Light and dark are contending forces in Tolkien's fiction, but the emotional weight is on the dark side." And I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but later in the paragraph, she says, "Their interdependence, the interdependence of light and dark, embodies all the polarities in Tolkien's theme. For as light cannot be known without darkness, so hope needs the contrast of despair to give it meaning. And free will opposes, yet is defined by, the concept of fate."
Wow. I love that quote because look at all those things it talks about that we've talked about.
That we've talked about despair, in the last 3 hours.
Free will and fate. That's beautiful.
And so I think if I can apply that sort of idea to this story, I think that's it. I think Túrin's story is there to show us just how bad the world can get. And to really to show in like really by vast difference how good things can, how good it will all end up. It will have a happy ending ultimately.
How much more important that new catastrophe is.
Right.
After having seen this catastrophe. That's true.
Yeah. And I think it's also, for Túrin specifically, one of my favorite things is Túrin versus Tuor, and we'll get into Tuor in a couple of chapters.
We will. 2 chapters.
Let's look at the contrast between those two characters. These are two characters who started out with the same genealogy, but they ended up in vastly different places. Yeah. And I think Tuor's success is heightened by the degree of Túrin's failure and tragedy.
Boy, absolutely. And we will get to him in just a couple weeks. In the meantime, though, and I never thought we'd get to this point, but that wraps it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony podcast.
Marathon episode.
My goodness. As always, listeners, and even more so today than usual, thank you very much for joining us. Be sure to join us again next time when we move on to Chapter 22. You'll be happy to hear that's a single episode chapter of The Ruin of Doriath. We'll try not to spoil that one for you.
Yeah, that's the one where Thingol finally listens to his wife and single-handedly beats Morgoth's armies, right? Right?
Yep, that's the one.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. Remember, if you're reading along and like to take notes as much as we do, don't mark up your first edition hardcovers. Go to the official library tab on our website, theprancingponypodcast.com, where you can find links to cheap paperbacks of Tolkien's works, as well as audiobooks, music CDs, and some other cool things for your Tolkien collection. If you buy it through those links, you'll even be helping to support this show without costing you a penny more.
Yeah, I think we've saved up enough for a cup of coffee for one of us, maybe. But you can also support us by leaving a review on iTunes. Even if you don't listen to us on iTunes, you can leave us a review. It just takes a few moments and an Apple ID. Some of you have said some amazingly kind things on there, like you must not really be listening to us, but we thank you for it anyway.
We really do. Thank you. And if you haven't done so already, you may subscribe on iTunes or through your favorite podcast app. You can find our RSS feed. Man, we have been going a long time. I'm getting tired. You can find our RSS feed on our website, or find us on Google Play, TuneIn, Stitcher, or most of the other podcast directories.
And a big thank you to those of you who are connecting with us on social media. We set out to start a conversation that everyone could join, and that's why we called it The Prancing Pony, and it's why we have the online common room on Facebook at The Prancing Pony Podcast and on Twitter at Prancing Pony Pod.
And social media is a great place to share our podcast as well. Retweet us, share us, tell your friends, maybe share one of our shorter episodes.
Yeah, please, at least at first. And one last thing, as always, don't forget to send your questions, comments, or your awkward family reunion stories to the Prancing Pony Podcast at gmail.com. Too soon? And we'll try to get them into our next episode. Well, 3 hours is still far too short a time to spend amongst such admirable listeners. But until next time.
Farewell, friends.